chat for me, please. Can you hear me okay? Head nod. There we go. All right. Okay, we're in the middle of the finance chapter. The next one we're going to move to is closings, contracts and closings. We've done the contracts part. Going to work on the closings part, and that is involving the procedures of a closing and the math. So a lot of math in both this chapter and the next one. Finance as well as closings, a lot, probably the vast majority. I believe there are about 8 math calculation questions on the final exam, but that doesn't mean they couldn't still ask you a math question, just not require you to do a calculation. So let's go ahead and turn those cameras on. No credit for off video. They watch us on that. And then put your name in the chat for me, please. So where do we stand? We left off in this chapter. We talked about the basics of finance and this concept of principal versus interest. We talked about debt service. What's debt service mean? What do I mean when I say the debt service on this property is $1,100 a month?
Interest payment.
More than the whole mortgage payment. It's the interest plus the principal is the debt service combined. It's the mortgage payment. And there's other things that lender might factor in and request in that month. It could be this, but when you hear just debt service, they're talking about the principal and the interest. That's the debt service, servicing the debt, the paying down of the principal plus the paying to the lender of the profit. The reason they're loaning you the money is the interest. So it's both of those things. But then there's also taxes a lot of times and insurance. The lender might request that your payment includes all of these things, more principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And as we'll learn about tonight, some loans require a special insurance policy. And that, depending on the type of loan, might be called PMI or MIP, but it's basically, the MI means mortgage insurance. And that has to do with how much of a down payment you're putting on the property. The idea here is that the lender feels more confident in you and your chances of repaying the loan if you put a higher down payment. There's more of your money that you stand to lose in the event of a default. If you don't keep making the payment and they have to foreclose, you're losing more. If you put 50% down payment compared to only 5% down payment, and then times got hard and you had to decide what are you going to pay, what bills are you going to pay this month, they're going to feel more confident that you're going to pay your house payment if you have a larger down payment, that 50% instead of the 5%. And so the magic amount of down payment, the key amount, sort of the borderline that dictates if private mortgage insurance or mortgage insurance premium is going to be charged, is 20% down. The idea here is the lender feels like the chances of you not paying your mortgage in the event of a stressful financial situation is increased if you have less than 20% down payment. And if you have less than 20% down payment, they're going to charge you for some insurance that you have to get, mortgage insurance. And that does not benefit you at all. As we'll see in a little bit, mortgage insurance is a policy that benefits the lender in case you default, in case you stop paying. The lender gets some of their recovered costs through this mortgage insurance policy, but the buyer gets to pay for it. Otherwise, the lender won't loan them the money, right? So that payment, PITI plus mortgage insurance, is what we're talking about. And maybe also you've got to pay homeowner dues if the neighborhood has one, a homeowners association. So your monthly payment could be all of this stuff. But quite frequently, especially in your material, you'll see the reference to a PITI or PITI payment, PITI. Just the part the lender is immediately concerned with is the principal and interest, and that's called the debt service, not including the taxes and insurance. So we're going to expand on that in these next couple of chapters. And we also talked about how a fully amortized loan has the same payment every month for the entire duration. So a 30-year loan is 30 years times 12 months, so 360 payments would all be, in this case, $1,500 a month. But the structure, the proportion within that payment of how much is going toward principal compared to interest changes every payment. In fact, it's just constantly shifting. So in the beginning, more of that payment is going toward interest, and then toward the end, more of that payment is going toward principal. We talked about a promissory note and how it's got some essential elements required, and those are the term of the note, how long do you have to repay it, the promise, the fact that you're borrowing the money, and the signature of the one borrowing the money. And that the note is negotiable. Negotiable means the lender has the right, retains the right to be able to sell that note packaged up, combined with a whole bunch of other similar notes to other lenders back and forth on the secondary market. The promissory note is not recorded at the Register of Deeds, but what device is, what legal instrument does get recorded at the Register of Deeds? If not the promissory note, then what? What gets recorded?
Mortgage statement? Mortgage statement?
Yeah, the mortgage, or in North Carolina, we call it the deed of trust. So the mortgage, the thing that pledges the property as collateral, the thing that says with your signature on it, hey, if I don't pay, I don't stay. I'm okay with you taking it because I'm so confident I will repay. The promissory note has some certain clauses built into it. It's got a clause that says if I miss a payment, the lender has the right to foreclose. It's the first step to the foreclosure process. They may not. They may say one payment, okay, we'll let that slide. We still want you to pay it back, but we're not going to foreclose on you necessarily. They could, though. And in 2008, 9, 10, there were a lot of banks that had a lot of people way far behind on their payment because they just were so busy. They didn't have time to pursue foreclosure for them quickly. So a lot of people had not made a payment in a year or more. It's just that any minute, any day, they could get that letter, and that's no way to live. That would be miserable. So the acceleration clause, accelerating the time within which the lender can repay, the lender expects to be repaid. Another one that might exist, depending on the loan, is a prepayment penalty. So prepayment penalty means that if you pay it off early, the lender may not be as happy with you as someone who takes the full duration because they're in it for the interest. And if you're repaying it early, they're not getting that interest anymore. How could you possibly be paying them off early? Certainly selling the property and using the proceeds to pay it off, but also if you refinance with another lender, you're going to get a chunk of money from that other lender and use it to repay this lender. And now you're going to be making your payment to that other lender. And the net effect to this current or this previous former lender is they get paid off. And so they're not earning that interest anymore. Because maybe you would do the refinance to get a lower interest rate after a few years with the original one. So that prepayment penalty is a discouragement for a borrower to incentivize them not to go ahead and pay it off. In either of those cases, it's not allowed for certain loan types. FHA and VA mortgages cannot have one. That's part of the whole helping somebody who otherwise couldn't get a loan concept with those kinds of loans. FHA, VA allow for lower down payment and lower credit scores. And so they're there to help people that can't maybe qualify for a conventional loan. We'll learn more about the differences between those three main types tonight. So not every loan has one of these prepayment penalties. They're not allowed to necessarily. And in North Carolina, it depends on the price point, but basically owner financed primary mortgages, not owner finance, primary mortgages don't allow them up to a certain dollar amount. And then the third one that we see the most is some sort of a due on sale clause or alienation, so that if you're going to sell it, you can't just take those proceeds and go buy some other property until you've used the proceeds toward paying off the existing loan. They make you pay off that loan with the proceeds of the sale, and the rest is what you get to keep after you pay your other expenses. So those are the main three, right? Alienation or due on sale, prepayment penalty, and acceleration. We talked about a lot of vocabulary words, including what we call a mortgage in North Carolina. On the street, back and forth in the business, back to talking to lenders and other agents, we still call it a mortgage. But officially, technically, what it is a deed of trust instead of a mortgage, but they both accomplish the same goal. I'll usually reference South Carolina because it's such a close neighbor, and it is using the other system. They use the two-party system that is officially called a mortgage. North Carolina, we use the three-party system, adding that extra person, the trustee. The trustee holds the deed of trust. That's the person that's going to send you the foreclosure notice in the mail if they are required to. So maybe you've gone 2, 3, 4 months behind on your payment. The lender has the decision to make, and maybe they decide, yeah, okay, it's not looking good. Let's go ahead and put them in foreclosure. And that lender would call the trustee. Who is that trustee? What kind of line of work is that trustee in? What are they typically? The person who is the trustee. Yeah, perfect. Probably an attorney. Most likely an attorney hired by that lender to be this trustee person. And you'll get that letter from the trustee with the letterhead of their attorney firm probably, and it says, your loan with so-and-so is now in default. The lender has instructed us to send you this foreclosure notice. You are now in foreclosure. That's the idea. So the other differences between these two systems is the names. Title theory state is what North Carolina is, compared to a lien theory state is what the two-party systems are known as. The title theory North Carolina type system is a non-judicial foreclosure process. We gave them permission to foreclose on us by signing the deed of trust. Therefore, they don't have to sue us for it. But down in South Carolina and other mortgage two-party states, they have to go through a suing them for foreclosure, judicial foreclosure process. We saw this word hypothecation, which basically is the pledging of the property as collateral by using the mortgage or deed of trust document. And the essential elements of a deed of trust are the signature of the borrower, the legal description of the property, and that it must be in writing. This one does get recorded. So you could look up the deed of trust for anybody that you know. Just plug in the address under the county Register of Deeds office website and find it, see what that original deed of trust or original mortgage was written at. How much did they borrow? Because that is public record. Then we got into the foreclosure process. And once the foreclosure begins, the first period of time is an equity period during which the buyer could scrape up maybe enough money to repay the loan, which is going to also involve some penalties and interest amounts. And then the second, once it gets beyond that point, it goes into the statutory period of redemption, and now it's too late to save it. Now it's going to go to auction. When it goes to auction, there's something called the 10-day upset bid period, during which the highest bidder has to sit and wait. And if another person makes a bid within those 10 days that is a certain amount more than the current highest bid, that starts a new 10-day period. What are some foreclosure avoidance methods? How could maybe the lender agree to help you avoid foreclosure? We looked at two different ways to, that's one of them, short sale. The lender could say, hey, hey, borrower, we are going to consider granting a short sale for you, but we need proof. What sorts of things are involved with a short sale method? Tell me some things about short sales. Yeah, there you go. Prove that you are in a financial hardship. So let's see all of your financial records, credit card statements. Did you bank statements of you and your kids and your under 18 kids? Don't try to hide $20,000 in the kids' savings account. We're going to want to see that too, by the way, they say. And can you get a cash advance from any of the credit cards? We want that money before we consider to grant your short sale. They're going to exhaust any resource they can to recover money because you're asking them to take less than the full amount you promised to repay. So that's going to come at a price, and that is minimizing how much we're going to give you the sort of the relief from, right? It involves also a short sale addendum in the paperwork because is a short sale consideration. You're just thinking about trying to get one. Is that a material fact that we owe to the world when we list a property where the owner is trying to get a short sale? Do we have to tell everybody, or is that the owner's business? Is it a material fact that the seller is pursuing a short sale? Do we have to tell any potential buyers that they might have to wait a while to get lender approval to grant this short sale? True or false? So when we talked about material facts, there were 4 categories. One was facts about the property: leaky roof, moldy basement. Also things down the street related to the property, a noisy, an airport, air traffic patterns overhead, a landfill nearby, and then also the financial ability of the parties to perform. And so when it comes to that phrase, being late on your mortgage, not a material fact, because you could make that up with pretty minimal consequences, right? You might have to pay a little bit more in interest because you're late, but it's not substantial. But then when it goes to the foreclosure notice, definitely, Jack, yeah, that's a material fact. And then also a short sale is a material fact too. You're thinking about pursuing a short sale. What's going to happen? We've got to wait and be at the mercy of that seller's lender if they'll grant it or not. So big time material fact when it's a short sale, and we need to include that addendum so everybody knows how this is going to work and what the options are. The buyer can walk at any time. The seller could entertain another offer that comes in after this one. That's all mentioned in that short sale addendum. So it is not fun. It is a potentially long, drawn out process. We talked about, the other method for foreclosure avoidance is a deed in lieu of foreclosure. The deed in lieu of foreclosure is sort of like, I don't know if you've ever realized this or heard this about cars. If you can't keep making your car payment, I've heard of where someone could just send in the keys to the car, right, to the lender. Well, same idea here. A deed in lieu of foreclosure. You're basically saying, hey, lender, I can't fix it. I've gotten too deep into this hole of debt. Please don't foreclose on me. I'll just give you the house. You don't have to foreclose, because if you foreclose on it, then it's going to count and last a lot longer on my credit history. And I want to get back up and running sooner than later. So instead of foreclosing, that's what in lieu of means. Instead of foreclosing, let me just give you the keys now. You don't have to fight me for them. You don't have to put me through foreclosure. But the lender has the right to grant this or not. They could say, no, we don't want to do that this time. We're going to go ahead and foreclose. Or it's up to them, right? You'd ask for it, but they don't have to give it. And it could also include having a deficiency judgment against you after the fact. So just because you gave them the keys, essentially, and they agreed not to put you through the foreclosure process, you still could have lingering after effects in the form of this deficiency judgment. It's going to affect your credit score until you've paid that off sometime in the future. We got to this part, and we can have a couple other ways of selling mortgaged property. One of them is selling it subject to the current loan. Investors like to talk about this one. You might take an investment course or read a book or hear something on social media or a YouTube video. And subject to, Pace Morby is a guy who sells courses on how to do subject to strategies. And the idea is this: you find a seller who's motivated, might also mean desperate seller, motivated seller. And you say, hey, seller, I'll get you out of this mess. If you sign over this quitclaim deed to me, giving me the property, I'll just keep making your mortgage payment as it sits. I'll make it for you. We don't need to tell the lender about it. This is the investor talking. But I'll assume your mortgage. I don't want to use the word assume. I'll take over. And as far as your lender knows, you're now making payments on time. This will help your credit. The downside, guys, is what? What's the bad part, the dangerous part of a subject to the existing financing method of purchase? Buying the property or taking title of the property subject to the existing financing. What could go wrong if some complete stranger investor now promises to make your payment for you? And they say, as long as you don't tell your lender, just sign the property over to me with a quitclaim deed and I'll keep making your payment. The lender's just going to think that you're making your payment, and that way your credit can get rebuilt because it'll be steadily getting paid. What needs to happen if you were to agree to such a thing?
Get some sort of contract in writing.
Yeah, because you don't know them. Are they going to pay? That's question one. Are they legit? Are they really going to make your payment? Maybe not. And if they don't, you're the one that's going to suffer the foreclosure because the lender doesn't even know they exist. By the way, it's really important to tell the lender things about the loan. And so do you think it's really easy for this subject to concept to be done improperly? And the lender says, oh, wait, what? You and this other person's making the payment. Did you sign a deed over to them? And if you've signed the deed over to them, you've effectively transferred ownership over to them. What's in place within the promissory note that triggers a certain clause? What's the name of that clause for when you sell a property that the promissory note now has to be paid in full? Two different A words. Not acceleration clause. It's the one that has another term too. Could be known as either one of those clauses within the promissory note says if you sell the property, you've got to pay off the full loan balance to the lender. And that's called the alienation clause. Triggers the alienation clause. A subject to method of purchase could easily trigger that alienation clause, the due on sale clause. Now the lender says, oh, wait, you sold it to somebody and you didn't tell me? Well, now that I know, I'm not happy with that. I want all my money. I want the full loan balance. Maybe that seller can't pay him off. There's no lump sum chunk of money because it's a subject to the existing mortgage. So what's that seller going to do? They don't have a chunk of money as they would if they had sold it traditionally and were given a big chunk of money for the purchase price, and then they have plenty to use to pay off the loan. They agreed to let that investor buyer make the payments, take over the payments. There is no money available to them to pay this due on sale clause, to pay the final amount of mortgage. So the foreclosure deficiency is the problem of the seller. And so it involves a lot of trust, and it could easily go completely sideways. A loan assumption is another way to sell a property. Now we're assuming the seller's mortgage. That could be the interest rate, the loan term. Those things are being assumed. With a loan assumption, the lender would have to approve it. With a subject to, quite often it's improperly done so that the lender doesn't know it happened. And once they found out, they could trigger the due on sale clause, and now that seller has big problems. With a loan assumption, we're telling the lender. The buyer makes payments on the seller's loan after they've been approved. They were approved. It's a qualifying assumable. And in the 80s, there were two kinds of assumable loans. There were a lot of loan assumptions going on in the 80s because the interest rates went crazy. They went up into the 13 to 18% range. We're not there yet. I don't think we're going to be, hopefully. We're around that 7.5%, but enough more than we were at 2, 3, 4, 5 the last several years. Now we're in the 7s, but people are starting to talk about and do loan assumptions now. Because if you've got a seller that has a 3% mortgage wrapped up in this property, and they're willing to let you assume that mortgage, that's a great strategy. Great way to get a much lower payment. You can't get a 3% rate on the open market right now because rates are in the 7s, right? 7.5. But you could assume a loan that was created back when the rate was 2 or 3 or 4%. But again, it's a qualifying assumable. In the 80s, they also had some loans that were non-qualifying assumables. You didn't have to qualify to assume them, but now you do. That went away in the 80s as well. So now qualifying assumables are possible. And in this case of a loan assumption, the foreclosure deficiency, if the loan is not paid back, they fall behind, and the lender decides to trigger foreclosure, the buyer is in first position to correct the problem. The foreclosure affects the new buyer who's assuming the loan, but then also the seller remains in a secondary position. That if the first buyer can't resolve the foreclosure issue and pay off things, the seller is in that second position and will be looked at to help remedy the situation. Let me see here. We, just as a sort of a recap, a review of some old material back when we calculated property tax. Let's take a little commercial break, not a break, but a commercial break. Real property tax was stated at 9 mils. Property tax, 9 mils. It would convert to what decimal? If we are taxed at 9 mils, what do we divide that 9 mils by in order to do the rest of the calculation? Sometimes the answer is right in front of you. Didn't even bother covering it up. There's two ways that we could see taxes expressed. One of them is dollars per hundred. The other is mils, and mils is the one that we think Jack divide by 1,000. So 9 divided by 1,000 is 0.009. That's the decimal we would use, in this case, answer C, in order to then multiply it by the tax amount, tax value. And then if it were 90 cents per $100 of value instead of mils, same thing, 90 cents, but this time divide by 100. Since it's per $100, that's the same thing as percent. Percent literally means per 100 cent, C-E-N-T, 100 pennies in a dollar, right? So 0.9 divided by 100. Look, the same decimal, 0.009. Just a reminder, both of these tax methods, any given municipality will pick one. They'll do one or the other, probably not both. The provision in an executory contract that requires the performance of an action before the contract is executed is called what? When you have to do something else in order for the contract to be executed is called what? This contract is what? What'd you say?
Is it contingency? Is it contingency?
Yeah, there you go. Like one example would be, in order for me to close on your house, I need to sell my current house. And this contract is contingent on that sale. So yeah, there are other other contingencies. Could be a loan contingency that says, if I don't get qualified for the loan and I have to back out of this sale, then you'll give me all of my deposit money back. That would be a loan contingency, which in our case of that contract 2T that we looked at agonizingly over the entire 4-hour period, I think it was last week, right? We didn't see any loan contingency provision. There's not one. There's not a built-in loan contingency into our standard contract 2T. That's a testable question, by the way. They like to ask you, standard contract 2T has a built-in loan contingency. They don't do true or false, but that'd be the idea. You would need to add it in if your client wanted one. And one way to have a loan contingency built in to the standard forms is if it's an FHA or a VA loan and we use the FHA VA addendum. That is essentially a loan contingency. It says if it doesn't appraise and you want to back out after the due diligence period, then you'll get your earnest money back if you have that FHA or VA addendum attached to it, signed by everybody. So yeah, well done. Buyer and seller reach an oral agreement. Oh, by the way, guys, I don't know if you've been doing this the whole time. Hopefully you have. But don't forget, if you look in the upper right corner of the Zoom window, you can click speaker view instead of gallery view, and you'll see what I'm sharing on a nice big full screen. Hopefully you're not struggling to see my little tiny square among all the other ones on the screen. So speaker view is what you want. A buyer and seller reached an oral agreement. In fact, I can do that in this class. Other class I teach in, it messes things up for the moderators. So here, let me just do it. There we go. Now it should be showing regardless of the view that you select. All right, now we're good. Okay. Buyer and seller reached an oral agreement for the purchase of the seller's home. The buyer submits a written offer with the agreed upon terms. Seller dies before signing the written offer. Which of the following is true? Seller dies before they have signed off on the written version. All they have is a verbal or an oral version. So what's true? The seller's estate has to honor the written offer, or the written offer is terminated because the seller never signed it, or the buyer and seller are under contract because they had an oral agreement, oral contract, or the buyer's offer was terminated because no money changed hands yet before the seller died. Best answer out of those?
B.
Everybody put one in the chat, please. Put an answer in the chat. Keep on going. Appreciate that participation. That's great. This is a very good learning question, learning exercise, because I wouldn't know it. It's deceiving. You would think the money would be involved. And what we learn in this method of doing real estate in North Carolina is the money has nothing to do with whether the contract is an actual contract or not. So the best answer is B. The written offer is terminated because it never got signed. The only thing that was agreed was before that existed. And verbal agreements they're not enforceable, right? It doesn't count for anything. The seller died before they could sign that verbal one when it was put into writing. It was never in writing, signed by everybody. And so it's gone. Interesting. Good to know. Thank you, Jack, for letting me know that. Fun. Wonder why that happened. Some of you might have had worse video quality when I hit that share. So let me undo that. I don't mind. Doesn't really affect me either way. But again, just hit the speaker view option so you can see it better, because I don't want you to have to struggle to see a blurry background. But thanks for letting me know. We won't do it that way. So yeah, the written offer, it never was a thing. It was in writing, but never signed by both parties because the seller died before they could sign it. And then let's look at the other, because again, when you're taking practice exams, think about the wrong answers and what makes them wrong answers. Don't just stop when you see, oh, this is the right answer and move on to the next one. Really get your money's worth out of every question. The oral contract, C is not right because the oral contract didn't really count, right? And then D doesn't work because the money has nothing to do with whether it's a contract or not. So here's another case where you might see the money being mentioned on a test question. They put the contract into writing, let's say tonight at 10:30 p.m. When do they have to get the due diligence check into the hands of the seller according to the contract? We need to give the seller the due diligence money, the due diligence fee, by when? It's on the front page of 2T. It says due diligence money is due by what magical little phrase? Some kind of a date. The blank date. Those are good guesses. And normally in this course, so many things are a 3-day answer. There's a lot of things that are 3 days. But here it is, the due diligence fee payable and delivered to the seller on when? The effective date. The same day that it goes under that it gets signed and communicated is the effective date, which is the due date of the due diligence fee. Due by effective date. The earnest money is one of the several days options. That has to be given either within 5 days or the date of your choice, depending on which version you use. But the due diligence money, effective date. So what does that mean? If we had this contract signed by everybody, and I appreciate your answers, appreciate you participating about that. If everybody signs and then we tell everybody on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, that they signed, then we have until the end of the day to get this due diligence money to the seller according to the contract, because that's the effective date. If you and you're the other agent, I'm the listing agent, you're the buyer agent, I get my seller's signature and then I send it over to you and you get your buyer's signatures, and then you tell me and maybe send it back to me. Now we both have a copy of the version of the contract signed by everybody. Communication has happened because we both have it. We can see that it's been signed by everyone. So we have signing by both parties and communication. And let's say all of that happened at 10:30 tonight. How long do we have left of the effective date? How much of the effective date, how much of today is left? If it's signed by 10:30.
I think
In
it has to
hours.
I think it has to be before 5.
Do what?
Does it have to be before 5? Does it have to be before 5?
It actually, if we get this thing signed by 10:30 tonight, we have an hour and a half of official effective date left, right? Don't be deceived and think, well, it's nighttime. Nobody's going to get out of bed and go meet somebody. Well, true. Probably not. But officially, according to the contract, it needs to be given by effective date. How much of effective date is left? Till midnight. An hour and a half in that case. In real life, the normal procedure would be, hey, other agent, let's just get up tomorrow at some point. We'll meet up tomorrow. I'll get the one solution would be the listing agent gets the check from the buyer agent and takes it to their seller. Now you know the seller has it. Now you know the buyer doesn't have it, most importantly. Or the buyer agent could say, well, tomorrow it's near my house, so I'll just swing by the seller's house and drop it off to him. As long as the parties are all okay with it, that's fine. What I would not want to do is when the buyer says, well, how about my buyer drops it in the mail? No, I don't like that. I don't want my seller to have to wait 3 days to get this thing. I want to go ahead and have it. And what if they don't drop it in the mail? Did they say they were and we wait 3 days and on the third day we find out that they actually didn't? Well, now what? Now that buyer can walk away. They would be breaching the contract but they would still owe the due diligence money. What if it's been 2 or 3, 4 days and the money was never collected and the buyer decides to walk? The buyer has the right to walk. It's just that the buyer is also obligated to give the seller the money. They haven't given the money yet, but then they decide to walk away. Well, okay, so the contract is dead, but that doesn't relieve the buyer of the obligation to give the due diligence money to the seller. Do you think if that buyer has not yet given the due diligence money and then they make a decision not to buy this house anymore, they might be less inclined to give the money up, period, because they never did. The agents let them get away with it. So the money is still owed. The contract could be in effect or not. It has nothing to do with the money, whether the contract is still applicable and a burden on the parties, right? So keep that in mind. They like to ask you questions involving the money, but the money is usually inconsequential in the deal. Yes, the buyer who backs out and never gave the due diligence money they were supposed to give because it's been 2 or 3 or 4 days later, then they have cold feet and they say, never mind, I don't want to buy it. They still have to pay the money. Another thing that could happen is the seller realizes on the effective date, I don't care, it's 10:30 at night, I want you agents to bring me that money. And you're like, even if we did, I couldn't get it to your house in time. Maybe it was like 11:30 by the time it all got signed, and just geographically impossible. You got to drive to meet the agent that has the money. That's an hour away, and get it, and then drive back and bring it to the seller. The seller could give a written notice that says, look, I want the money now, and since you can't get it to me now, here's your notice. You have 24 hours to get it to me, and if you don't, I get to walk away, breach this contract. It's not even a breach, and I can back out of this contract with no obligations, no consequences. That's what the seller can do if you don't deliver them that due diligence money within the effective date. Usually it doesn't come to that. Most people are okay with just handling it the next day, but that's what could happen. So that's a testable thing you could run into. We talked about this a little bit already. Let's dig more into this, back to the regularly scheduled programming of this topic. Loan to value ratio. That's a big phrase, big piece of this loan financing puzzle. How much are they borrowing? That's all this is. How much is the loan compared to the value of the property? If the property is worth $100,000 and the loan to value ratio that your buyer or borrower is getting is an 80% LTV, they're borrowing $80,000 of the $100,000 market value, right? So it literally is loan divided by value, loan amount divided by the sale price or the market value. That's how you get this. So an 80% LTV means borrowers borrowing 80% of the sale price. That means how much do they have to put as a down payment? If they're borrowing 80% of 100%, how much is the payment in the percentage? We got 100%. They're borrowing 80% of that 100 being the full amount. What's this amount? What's left over? 100 minus 80. Can use your fingers. There it is. 20%. 20% down payment. So the relationship of loan to value ratio to down payment is both combined together equal the full amount of the purchase price. Whatever your down payment is, the rest of that purchase price minus down payment equals loan amount, or opposite, or vice versa. So the test question might make you work for it a little bit and might say the loan to value ratio on a property where the borrower put down 20%. And you're going to know, oh, Okay, down payment is 20. Let's change that a little bit. If the down payment is 10% down payment means a 90% LTV. In which case, if the purchase price is $320,000, how much is the loan amount at a 90% LTV? Full purchase price amount, 100% of the purchase price is $320,000. How much of that is the loan amount if they're borrowing 90% LTV? We take that 320. We can write it down here, make a little circle formula out of it if we want to, and then multiply it by the 90%. So our loan amount is $288. So loan amount compared to LTV compared to sale price or market value. That's how that looks. And you'll need to calculate loan amount quite a bit in this section. Okay, in the next chapter, because I think it's 14 and 15. For some reason, I feel like the loan factor should be talked about in this chapter, but it's not. The loan factor chart is something you'll see in chapter 15. Let me pull that up. I think I have it close by here. And it's a printed chart where you can see how much, for every $1,000 borrowed, how much would your principal and interest payment be, depending on a certain interest rate and a duration of the loan. I know it's around here somewhere. Bear with me. Not quite. Here it is. So the loan factor chart should be somewhere around maybe chapter 15, maybe page 412, but I think those are old page numbers, so forgive me. Get a nice fresh one. I have one that I've written all over. So the idea is this: have you ever gone on the internet and messed around with a mortgage calculator? Maybe on some bank website, a mortgage calculator. All they're doing is this: they're basing the algorithm in that mortgage calculator on the loan factor chart. And so it's not the best picture, but it looks like this. For every $1,000 that you borrow, there is a factor. In this case, if you were to borrow at a 4% interest rate for a term of 10 years instead of 20 or 25 or 30 years, those are also in the chart. But since 10 is right here conveniently next door, I'm going to use that one. And so if the current interest rate is 4%, don't we wish that was a couple of years ago, 4% rate for a 10-year term, the factor is 10.13. What does that mean? That means for every $1,000 that you borrow, your payment is going to be $10.13, principal and interest. Your P&I payment would be $10.13 if you borrowed $1,000. In a mortgage, nobody borrows $1,000. They always borrow many more multiples of that. But this is the way the chart is set up. So to use the factor chart, which you do need to do for this course at least, not in real life, you just talk to a lender or use a mortgage calculator. But we're going to say, okay, in the question it says it's a 4% rate for a 10-year term. That means we're going to use the $10.13 number. If we're borrowing, let's say $450,000, how much is the monthly principal and interest going to be using the factor chart? Well, first step is going to be divide the loan amount Divide the loan amount by 1,000 so that we can apply the chart to it, so that we can apply this factor to it. And 450,000 divided by 1,000 is 450, right? Because you could just knock off those 3 zeros and there's what you're left with, 450. Now that we've done that, we're going to multiply it by the factor itself of 10.13. And that's going to tell us how much our monthly principal and interest will be if we were to borrow $450,000. 450 times 10.13. So our principal and interest payment is going to be $45.58.50. That's how you use the loan factor chart. Divide the loan amount by 1,000. Multiply that number by the factor that you need. What factor do you need? Depends on the rate and the term. So I doubt you're going to see a 10-year term very often on the tests or in real life for that matter. So let's make it a little more applicable. I don't go all the way up to 7 on this little snippet that I've carved out here. So let's just use 5 this time. 5% rate. If we follow it on over, not to 10, not to 15, we want to go all the way over to 30 years. This last column is a 30-year term. And if we keep on going, gosh, and this thing is crooked, so that's useful. Let me see. Sorry about that. Let's not be so complicated. Let's stick with 4% because I know that this is the right one. So if we go with a 4% rate and look over at the 30-year column, the loan factor on a 4% rate for 30 years is 4.78. That means if you were to borrow $1,000, your monthly mortgage principal and interest payment would be $4.78. Now we essentially need to find out how many thousands are in the loan amount. So this time let's do a $515,000 loan amount and find out what's the monthly principal and interest going to be. Step 1, divide the sale price by 1,000. Sorry. Totally just threw you off again. Divide the loan amount by 1,000. So what's 515,000 divided by 1,000? In this case, 515. Step 2, find the loan factor. They might give it to you in the test question. I don't know that they would make you look it up on the chart, but you know how to do that. Go down to the right interest rate, go over to the right duration of the loan. Now that we know what the factor is, 4.78, and we know how many $1,000 bills are in 515,000, there's 515 of them. We multiply those two things together. To get a monthly principal and interest payment of $2,461.70. Principal and interest. Is that good? That makes sense? That's the loan factor. In all that you're doing when you use a mortgage calculator, this is what is happening behind the scenes. It's applying this automatically for you, but you just need to know how to do it manually for yourself. Let's go ahead and take our break. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. you. Okay, let's look at the pretty version of the loan factor math. Showed you my scrawling version. So we've got the principal and interest payment needed to reduce the amount on the loan to zero. Take that loan factor number, put that on the bottom, take the loan amount, divide by 1,000, multiply them together. In this case, it comes out to 956. And again, that's the principal and interest. We're going to use this method as a step in a couple of other types of math problems we need to be prepared for. Interest payment, simple interest. We're calculating this stuff with simple interest, not compound interest. Just we take that balance due times the interest rate, and that gives us the annual interest paid. The interest paid in 1 year is whatever the balance currently is times the interest rate. Interest rate times the balance gives us the dollars of annual interest paid in a given year based on that interest rate. The rate and the amount. So if we have a loan balance of $200,000 at an interest rate of 4% for a 30-year term, we already know what the loan factor is on a 4% 30-year loan. It's 4.78. We used it. So we're going to take that balance due, the loan amount of $200,000, plug it into the bottom, and then multiply it by the rate of 4%. And that shows us that in a year, if we borrow $200,000 at 4%, we have to pay $8,000 of interest. The thing is, though, in the second month, this balance will be down lower. So it's never the case that the balance is always the same for every year. It's going to be less, right? And so, but that's what simple interest is about. We're just using the loan amount times the rate to get the dollars of interest for the year, to use it in some way that we need it to be applied for. In calculating, when we get to the closing topic, the topic of real estate closings, we're going to need to calculate things based on the day of closing. And so again, we'll use this method for one of those calculations too. So if we have a $8,000 annual interest amount, how much would the monthly interest be? If the interest for the whole year is $8,000, the interest for any given month of that year is just divided by 12, or $667. Are you with me so far? These little individual calculations. Does the logic make sense? You don't realize this yet, but these are all steps toward one of the larger math problems you might face on this test. And it's called, the question would be, what's the loan balance going to be after the first monthly payment? How much will your loan balance reduce down to after you've made your monthly payment for the first time? And so that's what we're working toward here. And it's these steps. I'll recap the whole thing and go back over it once we get to it. So what we've done so far is determine the monthly principal and interest by using the factor chart. That was this step. Where did it go? What did you do with it? Just kidding. Here's the monthly principal and interest, $956. We used the loan factor method to get that number. Here's how much your payment is every month. Remember, the monthly principal and interest payment doesn't change with a regularly amortized loan. So out of the $956 a month, we don't know how much of that is going toward principal versus interest. That's what we're taking these next steps to figure out. But we do know the monthly principal and interest payment in total is going to be $956 every month. So we did that first. The next thing we did is we need to determine how much of that $956 is going toward just interest in the first month. And that's why we did the second step. We need to find out the very first month that you have the loan balance is the full amount you borrowed of $200,000. The very first day, congratulations, welcome to Bank of America. You have been approved. We closed your loan, and now you get to start making us payments. The very first loan balance you encounter is the $200,000 amount that you borrowed. How much would that result in as an annual interest paid in dollars? the $200,000 loan amount times the 4% rate. $8,000 for the year. Now we need to convert that to month, to how much interest you'd pay in a month. That's why we did this step. $8,000 for a year means $667 for a month out of your month payment. Next step, let's take that monthly principal and interest we used the loan factor chart to get, subtract the dollars of interest that we just calculated. That's going to leave us with how much our loan is going to drop by. The $200,000 loan is going to decrease by $289 after that first month. You with me? So take $200,000, subtract $289 from it. And so our loan balance after the first month's payment is going to be oh so low, $199,711, right? Sort of slaps us in the face at how little it impacts our loan balance in the beginning. So that's the answer. How much will your loan balance be after the first monthly payment? It'll be $199,711. It went down by $289. And that's how you do it. The test question could get a little meaner. They might say, how much would your loan balance be after the second monthly payment? They won't go beyond that. They're not going to say after the 15th one and you have to just keep going over and over. Probably after first payment, they might ask what happens after the second. And here's what you do. You do everything you just did except using $199,711 instead of the $200. But all the same steps. In fact, you don't even have to do the first step because you already know the monthly principal and interest of what was that, $956? That never changed. That's still the same. So now we're going to take that $199,711, multiply it by the interest rate of 4%. And so in a year based on the $199,711, you would be paying $7,988 of interest instead of the $8,000 that we found the first time when we used 200. So 7,988 divide by 12. In the second month's payment, your interest is $665 instead of the $667. Right, so our loan balance is going to be coming down a little bit more. It's going to be coming down from $956 by $665. So principal reduction this time, $291. Subtract that from the $199,711, and now we have a loan balance down to $199,429. That's probably the extent of it. If they don't ask you how much would your loan balance be after one monthly payment, they would maybe say the second one. And you just plug everything back in the same way you did it the first time. So let's see here. Let me give you one. Let me give you this one. The loan factor is, let's just stick with the 4.78. The loan amount is $417,000. The loan factor, again, that's based on a 4% rate for a 30-year term. We've got the loan amount. How much will the loan balance be, or the loan amount? Well, let's call it a balance, loan balance, because you will have been paying it down. Will the loan balance be after the second month? That's the problem. We'll do it together. Step one. What's step one? We need to figure out the principal and interest payment. We need to figure out the interest portion, and we need to subtract that interest portion from the principal and interest to be left with the principal, how much that's coming down. Then we got to subtract that amount from the loan amount. That gives us the first month's balance. Something like that. So with that in mind, first step is principal and interest. How do we get the principal and interest for this? Use the loan factor method. Use that loan factor chart. Do we have everything we need? We need a loan amount and we need the factor. So if you like the T formula method, we'll take that loan amount divided by 1,000, multiply it by the factor that is given to us to get this thing, which is the annual interest in dollars. Change that question to a dollar sign. So let's just plug and play. 417,000 divided by 1,000 leaves just 417. The factor, 4.78. Multiply them together. Means our annual interest dollars, 1993.26. I did way more than step one in this one. Let me scratch that part out. So next, what are we going to do? We want to figure out the how much interest. We know the annual interest on the loan amount of 417. What's the amount of interest we need to do this problem? Monthly, daily. Go ahead. Sorry.
The monthly payment.
Yeah, we need to turn that into monthly. So 1993.26 divided by 12, because there's 12 months, is a monthly interest of 166. We'll call it 11. 166.11. Now that we do know that, we know our interest. We can subtract. We can take that monthly payment. Let's see. Hang on a second. I'm sorry, guys. I probably totally confused you. The annual payment is what this 1993 was. Oh, boy. Sorry. Brain dead. It's too late. Let's start over. And let's do the proper steps. Step one, get the PI using the factor. We're going to take that 417. That part was right. The 417 divided by 1,000 gives you 417. Multiply it by the 4.78. Our monthly monthly principal and interest is 1993.26. That's our P and I. Step two, calculate the interest paid in the first month. And we're going to use the loan amount, multiply it by the rate. So 4%, because that loan factor was based on a 4% rate. So here's the part that I should have done but didn't. 417 is the loan amount times the 4% rate means an annual dollars of interest paid of 16,680. Now we're going to turn that into a monthly amount divided by 12. So the dollars of interest is $13.90. Dollars of interest paid in that first month, $13.90. Now, step 3, the PI of $19.93.26 minus the I of $13.90 gives us how much the principal drops by. Which is $603.26. That's how much the principal is going down. So step 4, do that subtraction. The original loan amount was $417,000. Subtract the $608.26. So our loan balance after the first month's payment is $416,396.74. Is that better? Now that it didn't lead you astray. First step, use the loan factor method to get the principal and interest every month. That $19.93 is every month's payment. That doesn't change. The second step, we need to take the loan amount times the interest rate. Not the loan factor, but the interest rate. In this case, 4%. Because we're trying to get the amount of interest that was paid down so that we can subtract it from the monthly payment to find out how much the principal came down. Now, that's after the first month. The question was, what happens after the second month? This time, let me do a different color. We're going to make step 5. We keep the same interest and principal and interest amount. That doesn't change. We don't have to do that math again. But this time, we need to figure out the, here I go with a pencil problem. 416, oh boy, sorry how messy this is. 396, there we go, 74. That's our loan amount for the second month because we paid it down to that. Now we're going to multiply that by the 4% again. And if you do it right, you can just leave things plugged in the calculator and you don't have to be plugging new things in a whole bunch. 16,655.87 is the annual interest based on this second month's loan amount. But now we convert that into monthly for, divided by 12. To get $1387.99. That's the interest after the second month's payment. Now, step 6, subtract that from the PI of $1993.26. So it looks like that. We do that math. I'm just going to leave it in the calculator, even though there's this long decimal. So that might make it a little different than what you get if you clear it out first. The good news is the test won't give you answer choices that are a rounding difference apart. So whatever you get, if you cleared out and then plugged it back in versus what I'm getting by just leaving it in there, won't matter. Just pick the closest one. It'll be the right answer. So dollars of interest paid down from the second month, $605.27. Now we subtract that from the new loan balance that we calculated earlier of $416,396.74. There's that. And here's our loan balance after the second month's payment. $415,791.47. There you go. That's a lot. I can appreciate that might feel a little overwhelming here at first, but Let me pair you up. And this time, write this one down on some scratch paper so you'll have it. But this time, let's go with this one. We're going to use a loan factor. Let me take a peek. Oh, here we go. It's on the same one. This time, let's use a loan factor of 5.07, which I think is a 4.5%. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5.07 is a loan factor for a 4.5% loan. Loan factor of 5.07, which is a 4% loan. Nope, 4.5% loan. For a 30-year term. And the sale price, the purchase price is $573,000 at a 90% LTV. Uh-oh. What? Why do you got to be that way? How are we going to get the loan amount if we know the purchase price and the LTV? We need the loan amount. Is there a way we can calculate loan amount with this information? How are we going to do that? Multiply them. Take 90% of 573, right? So a little extra step in the mix. That's everything you need. So I'll just ask for you to do this. What's the loan balance after the first payment? We'll just go with the first payment. So let me put that in the chat if you need to. It might be easier just to cut and paste it over into something else. Loan factor 5.07, which is at 4.5% for 30 years. And sale price 573 at a 90% LTV. What's the loan balance after the first month's payment? And there you go. In the chat, cut and paste it. Let me put you in some breakout rooms so you can talk amongst yourselves in smaller groups. There we go. So now you should be able to click on that, go into a breakout room, make sure you cut and paste or jot down the problem before you do that, because I don't think you can see the chat once you go into that room, which I think is terrible. So I'll leave you there for a little bit, and then we'll come on back in and talk about it. So look for the button to click to go to your breakout room, and I'll see you shortly. You okay, Lena? You okay? Go ahead and click to join the breakout room so you can work on this with your partners. Anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions? Just let me know. Call me in and I'll come visit your room if you have a sticking point. How are we doing in here? You okay? Just working your way through it. Any questions?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay. It's a process. All right. How y'all doing? How we doing in here? Any questions?
I think the audio got cut off when you, I guess, I don't know for some reason, but can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Yeah,
Did
yeah, I don't know. The breakout room for some reason working for some reason.
Oh. So y'all couldn't talk to each other?
We got most of the problem done, but I definitely think I need to got the answer.
I wonder. I did that little voice broadcast. I wonder if that messed something up.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what triggered it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I like that broadcast thing. Gosh, nothing can work. Why don't things work? All right, I'll call everybody back in here in a second. Okay, waiting on a couple more people, I guess. Then we'll go over it. Okay, that's everybody. What's step one? What do we need to do first?
Calculate the loan balance. Loan to value ratio.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good. Let's turn this section into a loan amount. And so 573, what'd you get for that? 573 at 90%. LTV is a loan amount of 515. 700. Step two. What do we like to do next?
divide that by 1,000. Divide that by 1,000.
Let's see if we divide. Okay, because what we're trying to do is use the loan factor to get a monthly P&I.
Yeah.
Got it. So let's use that, and we'll take the 515.7 divided by 1,000, which is going to be 515.7. Multiply that by the factor. What factor are we using? What's our loan factor? Oh, sorry. I lost my chat. So there we go. There you are. Answering, and I wasn't even noticing. Yeah, our factor is 5.07. Here's a little note to be careful with in these problems, like what I did earlier, especially if the factor is the same number, first number as the rate. It's not in this case, but be careful. You know which thing you're supposed to be using, the rate or the factor in which given step. So the factor is 5.07 multiplied by the 515.7 means the monthly payment, principal and interest, $2614.60. I'm just going to round to the second decimal. That's our principal and interest. Step 3. What do we want to calculate in step 3?
Annual, then monthly interest.
Yeah,
payment.
the interest. And so we need that a loan amount of $515,700. Multiply it by what? The interest rate. And that gives us an annual interest of $23,206.50, which we then convert to monthly, divided by 12, for $1933.88. Step 4, subtract step 3 from step 2. So we're going to take our $2614.60, principal and interest, and subtract the interest of $1933.88. To get $680.73 of principal. Now we just need to figure out how much that affects the loan balance. Loan balance of $515,700 minus the $680.73. Gives us 515,019.27. I did not clear out of the calculator at least one step along the way, so that might be a little different from what you got. But again, just pick the closest thing, and it'll out of the 4 answer choices, and you should be fine. They won't try to deceive you by just a rounding difference. So if we wanted to move it on, take to the next level, what's the loan balance after the second month's payment? Then we will go back up to step 3 with this loan amount instead of the $515,700 and do all the same things. We don't have to do step 1 or 2 because we already know those amounts and they carry over, right? Let me know if there's any trouble with that. The rest of them aren't as complicated as that. I threw you in the deep end. So now the other math that we'll get into is way fewer, a lot fewer steps. And let's talk about the first one here. Loan origination fee. Loan origination fee. What is this thing? A loan origination fee is just it's one of many things the lender charges the borrower for giving them the loan, for making the loan. When the closing costs you have to pay as a borrower involve lots of different things. It involves, here, let me do this. There's all kinds of things that show up on the closing statement, closing disclosure. So buyer closing costs. There's something called a flood certification fee. There's different lender related fees. There could be discount points that we'll learn about in just a moment. There's recording fees to record the deed of trust, which maybe only amount to like $50. There's overnight fee to send the loan package over to the lender with all the signatures, the wet signatures. And that's just on the buyer side. There's even more. There's a lot of closing cost line items that the buyer has to pay for. And so another one of them out of the list is the loan origination fee. It's sort of like an administrative fee. And so if you're talking to two different lenders shopping around, one of them might only charge you a 1% origination fee while the other one charges you a 1.5% fee. What's the difference? It's just what they choose to charge. They could, you might want to pick the lower one, but they might also have larger fees elsewhere. They might charge you more in some other place. So if only there was a way we could see what all the fees are nice and clearly without having to read the fine print, well, there is. We'll talk about that later as well. They used to not be so transparent. And that was passed in the Dodd-Frank Act, that they had to get super transparent and put it all on a standardized form so the consumer could see and compare apples to apples, this lender quote with that lender quote. And if there's going to be, for instance, a prepayment penalty, here's where it's located, middle of the page, page 1. For any lender, every lender has to use the same layout, called a loan estimate sheet, a loan estimate. And then fast forward to the closing disclosure also has to be laid out there. Here's what we actually did charge you, are charging you. So that transparency has really been the focus since 2008, 9, 10, and the subsequent Dodd-Frank Act that was implemented to make sure that all that loan fraud and all that lender misbehavior doesn't get copied and replicated again. So an origination fee is just a percentage of the loan amount, and they'll give it to you in the test problem for this class, for the final exam here. They'll say, what's the loan origination fee on $200,000 loan amount if the lender charges a 1% fee? And that's literally all it is. Just calculate 1% of 200,000. That's it. Pretty basic. So the loan origination cost is going to be $2,000 in this case. Lender's charging a 1% loan origination. What's the loan amount? 200,000. What's the origination amount in percentage? 1%, for a total of $2,000 loan origination fee charge. That's all they'll do. They might also combine it with the next thing, but we'll talk about that after we talk about the next thing. So a loan origination fee, just think of it as an administration charge, just one of the many fees the lender charges. The other thing is optional. Not every loan has discount points factored in. Discount points accomplish a very specific goal, especially in a day and age like this, like today, like now, where the rates are higher than they were just even a year or two ago. And a lot of the reason the market has sort of slowed down a little bit from last couple of years is because the buyers are on the fence, some of them. The buyers don't like the interest rate went up. They were real excited when it was 2, 3, 4, 5%, but now that it's in the 7s, it got up to 8. Now it's kind of back in the 7s. Fewer buyers are buying. They have less buying power because the rate increased. What if there was a way that some of these buyers might be able to pay a little bit lower interest rate? They qualify for a mortgage, but the amount of mortgage they can qualify for isn't enough to buy the house they really want. that costs extra, right? That house they really want, of course, is $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more, but they only qualify for $400 instead of the $450. What if there was a way that their payment could come down? Well, there is. There is a way that could happen, and it's by paying discount points. Either the buyer could pay the discount points or anyone else. You could do it for them as their agent, but that's not very obvious, very common. But more likely, a seller or a builder might want to give the buyer incentive to pick their house, their product, by paying some discount points to get their rate down. So what's this discount point thing about? It's essentially prepaying some interest. We know that the lender wants to loan money so that they can earn interest with every month's payment over time. The lender will give you a lower rate to calculate your payment on if you go ahead and give them a chunk of money early, up front, rather than them having to wait for that over time. And so how much does one discount point cost? The cost of a discount point is a percentage of the loan amount. For your purposes, 1% of the loan amount. In real life, it varies. But for this test, for you to, what you need to know, one discount point costs 1% of the loan amount. Whatever the loan amount is, calculate 1% of it, and that's how much the discount point will cost. Here's the next part. You might not just want one discount point. You might need to lower the rate even further. And in this case, if the test question says the borrower will pay 4 discount points, well, if 1 point cost 1% of the loan amount, how much of the loan amount do 4 points cost? Pretty simple, straightforward math, right? 4% of the loan amount. So $200,000 loan amount times 4%. If the buyer pays $8,000 at closing, then they can get a discounted interest rate. Discounted from what? From whatever the current market rate is. So there's a relationship between a discount point and how much it buys the rate down. It's not 1 point. One discount point means that instead of a 7.5% rate, now you have a 6.5% rate. It's not like that. It's, for your purposes, 1/8 of a percent is how much one discount point buys the rate down. So let me make that simple. If you buy, or either you or a party in the transaction, like maybe a builders have been known to pay discount points as incentive to make buyers want to choose their product. And so a discount point one discount point lowers the rate by 1/8 of a percentage. So what does that mean? If the rate is currently 7%, what's 1/8 less than 7%? 1/8 is a decimal of, literally put it in the calculator, 1 divided by 8. If you're not happy with fractions, convert it to a decimal. So 1/8 is the same thing as a decimal of 0.125. 1 divided by 8, 0.125. So the 7% rate is going to get lowered by 0.125 down to 6.875. That's what your monthly payment would be calculated on. Not the 7%, but the 6.875. Why? Because you paid a discount point and bought the rate down by that much. Next question. We know how much the rate will be lowered by. How much is it going to cost you to lower the rate? Well, it's going to cost you the 1 discount point. We know that 1 point equals 1% of the loan amount. And so if that loan amount is, let's say, $400,000, what's 1% of it? It's going to cost us $4,000 paid up front at closing, added to all those other closing costs in order to enjoy a rate for all your monthly payments in the whole loan term of 6.875 instead of the 7. Does that make sense? The connection of discount points to lowering the rate. Let's look at it another way. Let's look at it in a pretty way. Well, by the way, what if it's going to cost, what if 6.875 is not a rate that's still not a rate that gets you the affordable loan payment you need? When you use this rate, your payment is still too much to fit in your budget. Well, let's lower it again. Maybe it's going to take 2 discount points to get it down to where it needs to be, and for your budget purposes. So 2 discount points is going to lower the rate 1/8 times 2, or 1/4. It's going to lower the rate by an entire fourth, which is what in decimal? You probably know this one. A fourth is 0.25, right? So we want that 7% rate lowered by 0.25 down to 6.75%. That's a rate that when we calculate our payment based on, it's affordable for us. So we need to buy 2 discount points, or talk a seller or builder into buying it, or grandma into giving enough money to buy 2 discount points, so that our rate can come down by 1/4 of a percentage down to 6.75. That fits our budget. So therefore, how much does that mean it's going to cost? 2% of the, I think I was saying $400,000 loan amount, in which case we're talking $8,000. So what would be more useful to somebody who is buying a house that is so expensive, it's borderline affordable? Maybe rather than negotiating the price down $8,000, it'd be more useful to use that $8,000 to pay the discount points. Instead of a lower price, they get a lower payment, more impactful lower payment, right? So those are all questions that would need to be asked by that borrower, talked over with the lender. Maybe you could throw in your 2 cents and help them understand this whole thing along the way. Yeah. So discount points cost how much? 1% of the loan amount. Next question is, how much do the discount points get the rate down? And it shows here on this chart, 1 discount point lowers the rate 1/8%. By the way, in real life, it varies, and it's actually tends to be closer to 1/4. But for your purposes, our math, simple math in this class, 1/8. So a $350,000 loan amount where the interest is 4.5% of a rate. The interest rate is 4.5, but the borrower can't afford the payment at 4.5. They need it to drop down to 4.25, 4.25. How many points would we need in order to buy the rate down to 4.25? We need to get it down by how much of a percentage? We need to go from 4.5 down to 4.25. That means a 0.25 reduction. How many decimal 0.25s are there in points? 0.25 times 8 total points. There's 8 points that buy down the rate from like 7 down to 6. In order to buy the rate from an entire interest rate amount, you would need 8 points, because they lower it by 1/8 at a time. So 8 1/8 is an entire percentage point. So if the stated interest rate is 7%, to get it down to 6, you would need 8 discount points. And so in this case, to buy the rate down by 1/4 of an interest rate amount from 7 to, or in this case, from 4.5 down to 4.25, you're going to need 2 points, 2 discount points, which are going to cost you 2% of the loan, 2% of the loan amount. We'll get into a little more of this and some qualifying math in a minute, in actually 10 minutes. So I'll see you after the break. So again, the relationship between discount points and the rate, the interest rate that your payment's calculated on, is in this chart. The rate that your payment calculated on comes down by 0.25% with the payment of 2 points, by 0.5% with the payment of 4 points, by 0.75% with a payment of 6 points, and by a full interest rate percent with the payment of 8 discount points, which would be pretty pricey, wouldn't it? Because a discount point costs 1% of the 1% is the cost of one discount point. So let's take it to an extreme. And let's say you needed your payment to not be 7.5%, which it is right about these days. Let's get it all the way down to 6.5%. We need to drop it by a full percentage. How many points is that going to cost? One is going to require 8 points because a point buys it down by 1/8. So we need 8 of them. 8 points is going to cost 8% of the loan amount. And so if we're borrowing, let's just say $300,000, what's 8% of $300,000? We're paying $24,000 to buy the rate down from 7.5 down to 6.5%. Is it worth it? It depends on how long you're going to be there. If this is just going to be a quick house that you're going to own for a couple of years because an investment, probably not. But if this is your long-term home, quite possibly. The payment, the savings of that lower interest rate over time might be worth paying the amount of money you need to up front. Because again, discount points are prepaid interest. Do you see how that's the case? We're buying the rate down, so we're not giving the lender the same amount of interest over time. We're giving them less interest because the rate's coming down. But we're giving them less interest with every payment because of the lower rate, because we're giving them a chunk of money in the beginning. So another term you'll see it referred to as is prepaid interest. Discount points, also known as prepaid interest. Another thing you might see it referred to as, we have discount points, also known as prepaid interest, and here's the big one that you might see it referred to as lender yield. Lender yield. Remember, discount points is what? Is it coming off your principal at all? Or is it pure profit to the lender for the privilege of having a lower interest rate? It's profit to the lender. It's money to them. It's interest to them. So it's something they're yielding. They're getting it, earning it, like crops. Yield. The crop yield in the farming business is how much of the crops you're going to actually be able to cultivate and harvest. So lender yield, they might give you something like this. When it comes to loaning money, does Bank of America loan you their money? Is it their money you're borrowing? Maybe, but it could also be somebody else's money. You could go to a mortgage banker like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, where they're loaning their money to you. But you could also use a mortgage broker instead of a mortgage banker. What is the deal with us? What the word broker when it comes to a real estate agent? Let's take me for example. I'm a general brokerage agent. That means Neil could help somebody buy a D.R. Horton new construction. I could help somebody buy your neighbor's house who happens to be on the market. I could help somebody buy your mom's house if hers was on the market, right? Lots of different options. It's not that I'm only selling new construction or I'm only selling an investor's houses or anything in particular. So a mortgage broker is the same thing. A mortgage broker has lots of different loan options. Several investors that they could pick from who are interested in loaning money. Rich folks loaning their money. What do you do when you have a ton of money? You let other people use it and you charge them for using your money. That's what a bank does. It's what an investor does. So whether it's a bank or a broker, there is the lender who is facilitating this loan, and there's the investor whose money is being borrowed. Not necessarily the same person, entity. The lender may not be the investor. The lender might just be the one putting the loan together. So, with that said, what if the question looks like this? An investor wants to yield, let me think, wants to yield 7% on their money. A 7% rate on the money they're investing, on the money they're letting someone borrow. The lender, who is not the same person, is willing to make a loan to you based on a 6.5% rate, because that's what you can afford. I'm creating new spellings for the sake of time. I saved so much time with only one R in borrower. Okay, I can't take it. I got to put it in there. So the lender's going to make the loan to you for 6.5% of an interest rate, because when they do the math, that's the payment you can afford. You can't afford the payment on 7, but you can afford the payment for this house on 6.5. But the problem is the lender that's loaning the money wants a rate of 7. We have a problem. The borrower in question can't pay 7, but they do have a chunk of money available to them, either because of maybe a tax refund, or grandma, or savings, or maybe it's not even the borrower themselves coming up with this money. Maybe the seller or builder is offering to pay discount points, money toward discount points. So how can we use discount points to pull this together? The lender's happy. We need to make them happy because they're getting a return of 7%. We need to make the lender and the borrower happy because the borrower can't afford more than 6.5%. How many points do we need to give as prepaid interest to the investor up front before the loan starts in order to pull this all together? How many points needed? We need to go from 7% down to 6.5. So we need 0.5 of a reduction. How many points is 0.5 going to cost? Take the 0.5, multiply it by 8, and that reveals that we need 4 points. Does that make sense? The 8 is the magic number because with one discount point, we drop the rate by 1/8. That's why 8 is the number we're using here. So find out the difference in the rate that we need to accomplish, in this case, 0.5%. Multiply that by how many points are in, how many points it takes to lower the rate all the way down. And that tells us how many points are needed. So we need to buy 4 points. Either we as the borrower, or get the seller or the builder to agree to pay, or grandma, or savings, something. Next question is, how much will 4 points cost? 4 discount points times the loan amount. So it depends on how much you're borrowing. We don't know from what we're given because we haven't talked about how much they're borrowing yet. So let's throw out some ideas. Maybe they're borrowing $500,000. In that case, how many dollars will the 4 discount points cost on a loan amount of $500,000? 4% of it. It's going to cost $20,000 to buy 4 points to lower the rate from 7 down to 6.5, So the investor is happy. They're essentially getting the effect of their 7% rate because they're getting $20,000 up front, and then they're agreeing to 6.5% over the life of the loan. Does that make sense? You might see a question worded this way. So investor or lender yield, investor yield, maybe they'll say it that way. The yield is a higher amount than what the person can afford. That means the difference between the two is how you get to how many points are needed to make it work for everybody. So just think always when it comes to mortgage money, there's an investor whose money's being borrowed. There's the lender who's putting the deal together.
So is that 20,000? So is that 20,000 the profit they're making?
Yeah, it's interest. Yep, it's prepaid interest. Great point. Discount points equals prepaid interest equals lender yield. Same thing. That is not coming off the loan amount at all. It has no benefit to the buyer other than allowing them to have a lower payment, which is a pretty good benefit. There's also, by the way, a tax advantage. You do get to deduct discount points in the year that you buy the house, among other things. So there are some benefits, but yeah, good point. It's profit to accomplish a goal that's happening all the time these days because the rates are higher and buyers kind of got paralyzed and thought, oh my gosh, I'm just going to wait till it gets down to 3 again. Well, you're going to be waiting a long time. We're not seeing 3 for many, many years. That was a special moment in time that you let surpass, you let it pass you by. But some buyers are just stuck and they just think, no, I don't want to, I would have to, well, if I'm borrowing 500 and let's even say that's a loan to value ratio of even 95%, not even that much more. That means a purchase price of 526. So buyers out there in this case would be saying, I can't get what I want for 526. So I'm just going to wait until the prices come down. Also, good luck. It's going to take a while for that to happen too. They're just now starting to a little bit stabilize, but they're still strong because inventory is still lower. Not as low, but lower. And if you do this, this is just a side note. One of the statistics we talk about with sellers is something called an absorption rate. You don't need to know that for this class, but essentially it's how long it takes the current inventory to sell out. If no other listings were added to the market as of right now, how many months would it take to sell what we got? And a seller's market like we're in is below 3, or probably the 1 to 2 month range. A neutral market is right at 3 months of inventory. And then over that, 4 to 6 months of inventory is a strong buyer's market. We are currently at every stat I've pulled lately for all my surrounding market, around 1 month of inventory. If nobody else listed a house as of today, it would take a month to sell out of all the listings that are for sale. So that's just, economics. Buyer market, seller market. We're just in a seller's market. The total payment that you got to pay the lender. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Let's share it. Total mortgage payment could include taxes and insurance. Usually includes all of this stuff. PITI, the pity payment, principal and interest, which is the debt service to satisfy the lender, but then also 1/12 of the year's worth of taxes and 1/12 of the year's worth of insurance premium. All together, most people pay the whole thing every month. The pity payment, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. The lender likes doing it this way because the lender wants to make sure the taxes get paid. Because if the taxes don't get paid, the taxing authority can foreclose on the house and they have the first position of lien hierarchy, which we learned several weeks ago. And then the lender also wants to make sure the collateral for their loan is safe. If it burns down, is there an insurance policy in place? So make sure that insurance coverage is intact. So we have PITI is your typical mortgage payment. So when you need to qualify for a loan, the lender is going to ask you some questions. The lender wants to know, can you afford it? And how do we figure out if you can afford it? First question is, what's your gross monthly income? Let me go back to here. Gross monthly income is a question the lender's going to ask that borrower, because depending on the type of loan, they don't want your house payment to be more than a certain percentage of that gross monthly income that you're earning. So maybe they find out that you earn $10,000 a month as a nice easy math number. So gross monthly income, 10,000. If you are getting a conventional loan, which we'll learn about today, there are I just totally blanked on the word. The debt to income ratio for conventional loan is the maximum amount of your gross monthly income they will let you pay for your house payment. And on a conventional loan, those numbers are 2836. What does that mean? In this case, for a $10,000 income, no more than 28% of that should be going toward PITI. In this case, $2,800 max. If you want to buy a house that costs more so that your PITI is more than $2,800, you won't qualify for it because it's too close to your gross monthly income, because the most they want you to be paying for your house payment, the lender, is 28%. So they're going to ask you questions. What's your gross monthly income? And you say, well, I got 2 different jobs, and between all of them combined, $10,000. And the lender says, okay, what house do you want? You say, I'm thinking about $1 million house. And I say that number because I'm pretty sure that doesn't work here. And if you calculate the payment on $1 million house, whatever it is, this isn't enough. The lender wants to make sure the max of the gross monthly you're spending for your house payment, it does not exceed 28%. By the way, if it's an FHA loan instead of a conventional, those numbers are 3143. They relax the numbers more for you. They let more of your gross monthly go toward the payment when it's an FHA loan. But we're going to stick with conventional for now. What's the 36 mean? Well, you probably have more monthly expenses that recur than just your house payment. Once you start paying for this house payment, you're going to be paying the PITI. But what else happens every month? Even right now for you personally, what are you paying as bills every month, not including utilities? What are some recurring examples of recurring monthly debts that you might, or the average person might pay? What's one that comes to mind for most people in the whole world who will need to go somewhere? And there's a good one, student loan, you bet. What about to get to your job? How do you get there? Student loans, medical bills.
Car payment.
Yeah, car payment is a big one, especially if you were just kind of chilling out, happy with your rental situation. You went ahead and bought the bigger, fancier car. You have a $800 car payment, but then you get a wild idea. Maybe I want to buy a house the next year, and you're like, oh man, I could have just settled for a $300 or $400 car payment. That $800 car payment is really affecting how much I can afford and qualify for. Others, I think internet probably falls more into the utility category, but that's good thinking. Car payment, medical bills, student loans, credit cards. That's another one. That's another big one that people get caught up in. So these are examples. It's the PITI plus recurring debt. Recurring monthly debt. No more than 36% of your gross monthly income can go toward that, can go toward all of these things, not including utilities, because you're going to have utilities once you buy the house anyway. But these are confirmed regular monthly bills that are unavoidable. Well, they are avoidable. You could pay off that credit card balance. You could get a different car or pay it off, get grandma to pay it off for you. Those are all considerations a borrower needs to think about. The borrower might say, wow, gosh, I can only afford a $400,000 house, but what I really want is that $600,000 house. Well, how can I qualify for more? Well, how could we make it so that 36% of your gross monthly income allows you to pay more for your house payment? We could lower something in this category so we can increase something in this category. If you can pay less toward the car payment and then therefore more toward the PITI, then your house affordability goes up. And so that's when people start getting creative and really thinking about what's important to them. I helped a lady who had just bought a new car, had a $350 car payment as of last year. She lived with her daughter. She was retired age, and she wanted to buy a nice new house, brand new house. She needed to get out of the house with the grandkids and the daughter and daughter's husband. And so it was going to be $300,000 to buy this brand new townhouse. Well, it wasn't. It was like a single level garden style house. Problem was, at her current proposed PITI for that house and all of her recurring, she didn't have student loans, but she did have car payment and credit card, but the car payment was getting in the way. In order to qualify, really what she qualified for was like $285. And that wasn't enough because the builder wouldn't come down to $285. It was new construction and they were pretty firm at their price. So she was asked by the lender, can you turn your car in? Can you sell the car? And she said, well, no, because I have to have a car, got to go somewhere. And a $350 car payment, how much better could we get a payment? Well, it's still a dependable car. It's like, okay, if I downsize the car, it's going to need to be a used one. And maybe the payment could get down to $200. Does that affect how much I can afford? Maybe, but it also is much less of a dependable car in her case. So those are all the fun trade-offs you have to think about as a borrower and as their agent trying to help them brainstorm this stuff. So that's what the ratios are about, the debt to income ratios. What if instead of a conventional loan, she can't handle the 36%? She needs to be able to pay more of her gross monthly toward PITI, and all these are fixed. So if we could just bump up that 36, well, we can't. So maybe we consider a different kind of loan. Remember the FHA loan? It's a 43%. We call it a back end ratio, which is the one with the payment plus the recurring debt. So now maybe all of these things together don't exceed 43. We've got an extra 7 percent points to work with. Now she can put $4,300 of her gross monthly income, if she earned $10,000, toward all of this stuff. And so changing the loan type, that might be a good reason to do so. We'll get more into the differences in the loan types in a little bit. So with that said, let's take a look at the slides. You've got the monthly principal and interest plus the taxes plus the insurance, and that can't exceed 28% of the gross monthly income. And then once we factor in the car payment, maybe the HOA factors in there too, credit cards, that plus the PITI cannot exceed 36%. So if the debt to income ratios to qualify for this conventional loan are 28-36, the front end ratio of just the principal and interest, taxes, insurance is 28% max. And then the back end ratio of all of that plus recurring debt is the back end ratio of 36% max. Then what numbers are we looking at here? We've got, let's see, the PITI payment based on the house that they want to buy is $1,500. That's how much that house costs. $1,500. Your expenses for this borrower, $700. Expenses, recurring expenses, including car payment, credit cards, student loans, $700. So what do you need to be able to pay for both together? $1,500 for the PITI plus $700 for the recurring debts means you're paying out $2,200 a month if you buy this house. Can you afford it? So what would you need to earn gross monthly income in order for this to work? You would need your PITI $1,500 to be not more than 28% of your gross monthly income. Therefore, if we use our little division trick we learned back in the Seller Net, we take the $1,500 PITI payment, divide it by the 28%. You need to earn $5,357 gross monthly income in order to afford a PITI payment of $1,500 so that it is no more than 28% of it. But we're not done. The lender says, well, you qualify under the front end ratio. If you make at least 5357, then 1,500 is no more than 28% of that. But you also need to qualify under the back end ratio. And so we do the math. The front end plus the back, the PITI plus the recurring was 2,200. That can't exceed 36% of your gross monthly. When we do that division, you would need to make $6,111 a month gross income to qualify under the back end ratio. So if these are your two numbers, what if your monthly gross income is $5,200? Do you qualify for one or the other or both or neither of these ratios? You make $5,200 a month. Can you afford this house? And you can't at all. What if you make $5,400 a month? Is there one of these ratios, at least one, if not both, that you qualify for? $5,400, you qualify for the front end ratio because you make at least the 5357. Problem is, you need to work to get down the 700. You need to knock that 700 out altogether, mostly, maybe at least 600 of it, because you don't qualify on the back end ratio. But what if you make $6,200 or $63,000? Now you're good. You qualify for both. So in order to qualify for a loan, you need to make enough to be able to pay the PITI at a max 28% of your income and the PITI plus recurring debt at a max 36% of your income. So that's how you would know what do you need to make. And so the discussion might be, well, I make, let's say you make $66,000. Let's say you make $6,000 a month. You're off by $111. Could we adjust the recurring expenses? Maybe the credit cards get paid off a little bit, or the car payment. Maybe you're just thinking about buying the new car that's going to be a $400 payment, but you could just stick with the car you got, in which case this recurring expenses isn't going to go up to $7. It's only going to be $3. What would this look like if your recurring expenses were only $300 instead of $700? Well, then we would take $1,500. Let me show you the math here. We currently have 1,500 plus 7 for 22. But if we had 1,500 for the PITI plus only 3, because you're not going to buy that car that's going to cost you the extra 400, then you only need your 36% back end ratio to be 1,800, in which case we go 1,800 divided by 36. Means we can afford this house by only making $5,000 a month. What if that's way better than we even thought we needed to be. What if we only dropped the 700 recurring down to 600 recurring? So if we go 1,500 plus 6, then we need that to be what, 2,100? And so 2,100 divided by 36% means if our income could be 5,833, then we qualify for this thing. So it's not that much. It impacts quite a bit. What if we only needed the recurring debt if we could get it down to 650? Well, then 1,500 plus 650 is going to be our total back end ratio max amount. So that divided by the 36% means 5,972 is how much we would need to make per month in order to afford this house. So if we could just adjust our recurring monthly expenses by even $50 a month, instead of having to earn $6,111, we could only need to earn $5,972. That's what motivates people to change their car payment. pay off some credit card, beg parents to help you pay off some credit card bills so that monthly is lower. And kind of that's how that works. So a purchaser is purchasing a property. We're going to sort of do a whole combination of a bunch of possibilities. You'll never see a problem like this with like 7 different things you have to do with the problem. I'm just getting a lot of mileage out of this one problem. So we're going to take a look at the possibilities. A buyer is purchasing for $425 to buy the property. Let me make this a little bit more easier to read here. To purchase the property, they'll need to have a conventional loan with a loan to value ratio of 90-10. The interest rate is 4.5% for a 30-year term. The lender's charging 1% origination fee and 3 discount points to get them down to the payment they can afford. The municipality is taxing properties at 14 mills based on a 75% tax value. Are you bleeding from the ears yet? The commission is 5.5%. Attorney fees and miscellaneous expenses are $4,000. How do we get these various answers with all of this content? By the way, again, this would never be a problem, but you are going to have cases in a problem where you need to know what you don't need to know. Some of this stuff you don't need to know for commission. How much is the commission going to cost? For instance, the first one here, what's the commission? It's 5.5%. 5.5% of what? Where's the thing we need to calculate the commission?
Commission rate.
Say that again.
You're talking about that 5.5% commission rate.
Yep. The commission is 5.5 times what?
The purchase price.
Yeah, you got it. 425. So 5.5 times the 425 is whatever that is. There we go. 425 times 5.5%. Commission's going to be a total of $23,375. What's the next one? Next one is tax value. What's the tax value on this property? What do we need to know to calculate the tax value? Not the tax amount, not how much you're paying in taxes, but the tax value of the property. You might also see this referred to as assessed value. We need the purchase price, because that's also known as the market value. When that's the 425, we're going to multiply that by what?
0.75.
0.75, because that is this part down here, which says taxes are based on this. Yeah, this tax amount, 75% of the market value. So what is 425 times 75%? Our tax value is $318,750. The third one is annual taxes. Well, we're halfway there. What else do we need to know to calculate annual taxes? We start with the tax value. We also need to know the tax rate, which is going to be the $318,750 times, it looks like we've got what? Mills. 14 mills divided by 1,000. And so we multiply that 318,750 by the 14 mills, divide all that by the 1,000, because you could do it in that order if you needed to. Taxes, $4462.50. All this is old news. You've been here before. You've done all this before. Next one is loan amount. How much is the loan amount on this? We know our sale price, $425. What else do we need?
LTV ratio,
which is
90-10.
90%. Yeah, 90-10 ratio. So that is 425 times 90% of it. Killing it. Rocking it out. Times 90%. Our loan amount is 382.5. Continuing on. Annual interest. Uh-oh. Now we're getting into some new math, new stuff we've just learned. Annual interest. How much is your interest for the whole year based on the loan amount you start out with? We need our loan amount times the rate. And our loan amount we determined is what? 318,750? No. What was the loan amount? Oh, we just did it. Sorry, 382.5. 382.5 is our loan amount. That's the 90% of the price. Times what's the rate? Just saw that, Jack. Thank you for that. 4.5%. That's the interest rate for the mortgage. And so 382.5 times the 4%, 4.5%, means a annual interest of $17,212.50. And then total origination fee combined with discount points. They like to do this to you. They don't just ask you the origination fee or the discount points. They want to know both together. How much would it be for those two things combined? So origination fee plus discount points. You can do this a couple different ways. How much is the origination fee the lender's charging in the problem?
1%.
1%. And how much are the discount points the lender's charging? It's right beside it. So 3. So the combined, you could do it two different ways. You could take that loan amount of 382.5 and calculate 1% of it and put that here, and then 3% of it and put that here and add them together. Or you could just say, well, 1% of the loan amount plus 3% of the loan amount is 4% of the loan amount, and then just do 382.5 times 4%. If you need to do it in that one step or you need to do it in the two-step method, whichever way works better for your brain. Doesn't matter. You're not really saving all that much time. So you do it whichever way makes more sense. So both of them combined is $15,300. Since it's asking you for how much they are combined, this is good enough. This is good enough. You don't need to do them separately. Does that make sense? And then loan balance after the first payment. Oh, brother, there's that guy again. So here's what it looks like. I'm going to hop out. So there they are. We've got, let's see if we got it right. 23,375. Yep. The second one, we got 318,750, 44,6250 on number 3, 382,500 for the loan amount on number 4, 17,212 cents for number 5, which was the interest in the year. And then the combined origination fee plus discount points was 15,300. And then number 7, to get the balance after the first month's payment, we're going to use our loan factor, 5.07 from the problem, times the loan amount, divided by 1,000 to get the 1939.28 for the monthly principal and interest. Now we need to get the monthly interest, which we're going to get by taking the yearly interest we already determined of 17,212.50 divided by 12. So our monthly interest amount is $1,434. Subtract that from the payment to lower the principal amount by $505. And I don't have that filled out here. So we're just going to take that 382,500, subtract 505 from it. So it'll be 381 995, I think. We okay there? Sort of a recap of pretty much all the math that we've done so far. A buyer is discussing a loan with their preferred lender. Let me get this larger. During the qualification process, the buyer learns that to get the loan, they have to have enough income to meet the debt to income ratios of 2836. It's a conventional loan, 2836 are the front and back end ratios. Their current income is $15,000 a month. Using the above information, what's the maximum amount the buyer could pay for monthly principal and interest? If they earn $15,000 a month and they can't pay more than 28% of that, what's 28% of 15,000? We're going to take that 15,000 and just multiply it by 28%. They can't spend more than $4,200 for PITI. The next question is, what's the maximum amount the buyer could pay for monthly total expenses? Wait a minute. We also know that 15,000 times 36% is the most they can pay for everything together. So let's see what that is. 5,400 for PITI plus recurring debt. And so if combined, the most they can spend is 5,400, and just for the PITI, it's 4,200. Then that means their recurring debt can at most be, what's that, $1,200? That's recurring debt. So let's look at it over here. There we go. Oops, there it is. 15,000 at 28%, 4,200 max for PITI. 15,000 at 36%, 5,400. And the total recurring debt max in this scenario, the difference between those two is $1,200. What if they need to qualify for more house? They need to lower their recurring debt so they can put that money toward the PITI. So that's going to mean what's in our recurring debt column? We've got car payment, credit cards, student loans. Maybe you're almost done paying your student loans. Haha. Pause for laughter. That's going to take forever. But maybe you're getting some money. Maybe you can pay off some credit cards and not have to pay $1,200 a month in recurring debt. You can drop that down to even to $1,100 or $1,000 a month. That's going to affect what you can afford quite a bit. So we would need to know the interest rate and some other things to determine what the purchase price actually is that we can afford. But that's not the point of this problem. It's just to calculate the debt to income ratio dollar amounts. We come back from break, we'll do this little number and finish up a couple maths, and then we'll get into kind of the second phase of finance, which is about the secondary mortgage market. See you in 10 minutes. together, knock out this last session. All right. Let's talk about the secondary mortgage market. The Federal Reserve System is neither federal nor a reserve. It's just what we have in place. It influences the economy, right? The Federal Reserve Chairman makes decisions that affect the economy, and it's designed to hopefully stabilize the economy, create a favorable climate, control the interest rate, which dictates how people can choose to spend money. Oops, sorry. Thank you for that. Federal Reserve System is neither federal nor a reserve. It's a thing that we have to work with, and it influences the economy. It regulates how money flows. It controls the interest rates because it's what the Federal Reserve loans money to the different banks at an interest rate, and then the banks put a premium on top of that to loan the money to you and me. So that way it can influence the interest rates that the banks charge you by how much they charge the banks. There's 12 banks as part of the Federal Reserve System, 12 banks across the country. They also impact how much banks have to keep. They set the reserve funds that the banks have to have on hand. Because one of the things that led up to the Great Depression back in the 1930s was that banks were getting deposits from people. People would put their money in the bank, maybe think of farmers and workers, and they'd just park their money there. They wouldn't take the whole chunk out. They would take enough to pay their bills, but they would leave money there. And the banks eventually realized, wait a minute, all this money is just sitting around in our vaults. Why don't we loan it out and make interest, make profit on other people's money that we're loaning out to still yet other people? And that worked great. They made a bunch of money that way, the bankers did. But the problem was they got out of control. They got greedy, and they loaned out so much of the money they had on hand in the vaults that when the economy shifted and people got in trouble and came to the bank to pull out all their money, there wasn't any because the bankers had loaned it all out to other people. So from that, we learned we need to have minimum amounts of reserves that the bank have to keep on hand. The banks have to keep on hand. So bankers can't loan them out every dollar that they have to make loans with. That's what reserve funds are talking about. So the whole point of the Federal Reserve is to sort of keep things healthy. But that's going to depend on the way it's run. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, he could have been replaced. A few years ago, Biden had the choice to either let him keep it or appoint someone else. And so the administration can influence the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which could, of course, go down the line there. But the Federal Reserve System is this banking system. They loan money to your bank, and then your bank loans the money to you at a little bit of a higher rate. So we talked about how the primary mortgage market is the point where you're going into a lender or a bank and saying, I need to borrow money for this single purpose. It could be for buying a business, or for mortgages. I want to buy a house, therefore let me borrow the money. And that bank says, okay, we've got different pools of money that we can loan from. That could be from insurance companies. Have you ever wondered where your premiums go when you pay that insurance bill? They invest in the mortgage market because it's somewhat stable. They feel pretty confident in the stability of the mortgage market. The money that's being loaned out or used to originate these mortgage loans also comes from endowment funds, from investment groups, from mortgage bankers, as well as brokers, from credit unions and pension funds like New York NYPD, right? New York Police Department. Their pension fund might be used. Part of it might go toward investing in the real estate market. So origination of mortgage loans, lending the money directly to consumers. That's the primary market. And then when these lenders package up all of the loans together that are similar, they don't want to package up the dissimilar loans. So here's what it might look like. Here's lender A. And they've got a bunch of people with A credit, which means they're pretty confident that they're actually going to get paid back. So they lump in all their chunk of A credit borrowers, they lump together all their B credit borrowers, and so on. And then if they want to get a chunk of money available, instead of having to wait 30 years to get paid out that interest over the life of the loan for all these A credit borrowers, they decide, I want our money now. Can we sell this to lender B and let lender B hold this money and be satisfied with the 30-year payout while we get the money now? And lender B says, yes, my plan is to have longer term payouts. It's going to pay me more in the long run, and I'm willing to pay you a profit, a premium for that privilege. Let me buy the package deal of all of these many A credit buyer loans. And oh, by the way, you want to do a deal for the B paper too? Maybe, maybe not, right? So they lump them together in levels of risk. So similar risk mortgages, promissory notes, because they're negotiable, right, are lumped in together. And that is essentially the secondary mortgage market. Lenders selling chunks of loans to other lenders, buying and selling. Because in this case, lender A is going to take that money they earned from lender B and put it back into the primary market and make these little individual loans one by one again at another profit, right? And then they'll come up with another big chunk of them and sell them off again. And it's just a cycle. It's just a constant cycle. So the secondary market is buying the loans from the loan originators, putting the money back in the primary market. There are three major marketplaces. You could visualize them as like a flea market. You ever walk around in a little country flea market where you go from table to table? So Fannie Mae is the largest and oldest of the secondary mortgage markets. Fannie Mae dictates some policy as well, what some requirements are for these things. And then Ginnie Mae, silly names, right? Fannie Mae stands for Federal National Mortgage Association, FNMA, because it kind of looks like Fannie Mae. Ginnie Mae, GNMA. Those are the government-backed loans. Ginnie Mae is about the government loans, FHA, VA loans, for instance. And then Freddie Mac is a smaller version, and that stands for Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation. I don't know where they get Freddie Mac from, but Fannie Mae is the biggest of all of them. It purchases conventional loans back and forth, chunks of those. It also purchases VA and FHA loans. It's the oldest, it's the largest, it's a marketplace for buying and selling these loans. They also help with policy passed by the government on housing. They also stabilize the mortgage market because they're dealing in these numbers, and they establish underwriting guidelines used in whether to make a loan or not on the primary market. Underwriting guidelines: when you apply for a loan, the first point of contact you'll meet as the single person, just a lender. They don't have to be single. I'm just saying a human borrowing money. The first person is going to be a loan originator. That's the loan person, the loan rep. And that person is going to help you make the application. They're going to give you the application, fill in all the blanks based on your income and your debt. That's your first point of contact. And we as brokers, we have lots of different loan originators, or loan officers might be another way you could refer to them, kind of in our contact list. We have several we can suggest at any given moment that we like, not just because they're cool people, but that we like because of how they treat the client. They've done a great job for our clients, therefore they're on our short list. So you first talk to this originator officer and fill out your application. They're going to answer questions about the process. The next step, once the loan is applied for, it goes to a loan processor. This person you may never meet. They might send you an email from time to time, but this loan processor is going to go down through in a data center somewhere, and they're just checking off boxes. Did we collect the last 2 months of bank statements from this borrower? Did we get the last 2 years of tax returns from this borrower? Did we get the appraisal done yet? Does it come back in? They go down through the list of checklist. What's all required to make this loan go through this loan process? And they might occasionally send an email to you and say, hey, we've extended a little longer because your closing was delayed. We need the most recent tax return or most recent bank statement or anything else that comes out of their air that they might know that they need to do and collect from you. That loan processor is going to take all of these items and package them up into a nice little gift box with a bow on top, a figurative bow, because the decision maker for the lender is called the underwriter. And that loan processor wants to make sure the underwriter is making the best use of their time, that they have everything they need to decide if they're going to give the loan or not. That's the three main people or departments involved with this loan process. So the underwriting guidelines, the underwriter is saying, okay, I see the tax returns. I see the income. I see that the percentage of their income is not exceeding the debt to income ratios that are allowable. We are all in line there. I'm happy with that. They have other guidelines they have to follow too, based on the type of loan. Because don't forget, these are different. FHA, VA, conventional have different requirements. So that underwriter is making sure that depending on the type of loan, let's say it's a conventional one, are all of these things in line with the requirements for a conventional loan? Requirements for what? This loan approval needs to comply so that it is actually marketable on the secondary market. The Fannie Mae guidelines are met so that it is eligible to be bought and sold on the secondary market. That's the underwriting guidelines we're talking about. The underwriter makes sure it is sellable because they want to end up with a loan that they can add to all those other loans and then buy and sell on the secondary market to another lender. So they want to make sure it is following those guidelines. There won't be a problem that disqualifies that loan or many of those loans from being sold because ultimately they want to sell them so they can get a chunk of money. So they can now make a whole bunch of more one-off loans, one by one by one. That's sort of how this thing works. And that's why Fannie Mae establishes those guidelines, because they want to make sure these loans are going to be accurately assessed in terms of risk. They want to make sure these are truly this level of risk, no more, no less, because they want to be sure they feel confident in loaning the money. Ginnie Mae deals with government loans. Ginnie Mae exists because the FHA and VA loans have more risk, typically, just because of the numbers. Let's understand why that is. We talked a little bit about it, but a conventional loan has different requirements than FHA and VA. What's the down payment minimum in general for a conventional loan? Anybody happen to know? How much is the lowest for down payment you could get away with for a conventional loan?
Is it 5? Is it 5?
Exactly. For our purposes, 5. There are exceptions depending on higher credit scores and other things, but for our purposes, we're going to say 5% minimum down payment for a conventional loan. What if you don't have 5%? Well, the government steps in and says, let's make it possible for people who can't afford 5 to buy houses, and let's drop it to 3.5. If they use a FHA loan, you can only put 3.5% down. That means you can borrow more. So if 5% is your down payment, then 95% is your LTV. If 3.5% is your down payment, then 96.5% is your LTV. And then for a VA loan, as low as 0 down. That's the big benefit of a VA loan for veterans. Let's give our military veterans a reward, which means they can borrow 100% of the sale price. Well, these are in place to help people that can't handle this one. They can't maybe qualify for the conventional or for VA just to give them an extra benefit. the costs involved, the closing costs that you have to pay to get any of these loans, vary. But if you were to look at the full scope of all the closing costs, all the costs to get these different kinds of loans, the conventional loan is the cheapest, the fewest fees, fewer fees overall. And then both of these have more. So while there's a benefit of getting an FHA loan, the benefit is you can have less down payment because that's just, you don't have as much as you would need for conventional. The downside is they're going to charge you more fees in the long run. Over the life of the loan, it's going to be more expensive. Like everything in life, right? If you have higher credit or better credit, you can enjoy better prices. And then for a VA loan, same thing. Even though it's no down payment, there are other fees that are built in over time with those monthly payments that do add up to more. So as a general rule of thumb, just because you have a military veteran client doesn't mean the VA loan is the best choice for them. When might it be the best choice for them? If they don't have any money for down payment, for sure. But what if they do? There's a lot of military veterans who've maybe worked outside of the military or in the military, and they have a chunk of money saved and they have enough for a down payment. They don't need to pay zero down. So even a military veteran might be better suited to get a conventional loan because they're going to have fewer fees in the long run. The main thing is this zero down important to them? And it may not be compared to how much they're going to pay over for fees down the road. Same for FHA. 3.5% down, that's got to probably be that, and allows for lower credit scores too. So if that's the only way you can get a house, then go for it. But if you have a choice between this and a conventional, but you need to pay a little more down payment for the conventional, well, if you pay a larger down payment, what's that really mean to you? All that means is you have more equity right off the bat because it's your money that's required as down. You're borrowing less, which isn't a bad place to be. It really comes down to, can you financially handle that? It's not like you're paying extra in interest payments to the lender. You're just having to put more of your money in the house out of access to yourself. But it's still your equity. So the Ginnie Mae mortgage market, secondary market, takes these government loans, these FHA and VA loans, which allow for lower credit scores because we want to help people buy houses who otherwise couldn't. And it puts an extra level of protection behind them so that Fannie Mae is more comfortable buying and selling them on their marketplace. Fannie Mae does deal with FHA and VA loans, but only because Ginnie Mae exists and stands behind them. Ginnie Mae basically being the government. They say, let me pay the risk differential. So in case these FHA, VA borrowers default, which they're slightly or maybe some amount more likely to default because they have lower down payment, then we'll cover that level of risk for you, Fannie Mae. So feel free to buy and sell them too, as well as conventionals. Fannie Mae is not just for conventional loans being bought and sold. They'll package up FHA and VA loans too. But Neil, FHA and VA loans carry higher risk because the borrowers are putting less down payment and they can have a lower credit score. And that's why Ginnie Mae exists, to back them up, to give a safety net. So Fannie Mae is willing to include them and buy and sell those too. It also allows investors to purchase shares in loan pools, and it also pays directly out to investors. Ginnie Mae, basically just think FHA and VA, and it backs them up to make up the risk differential. And then Freddie Mac loans money from conventional loans, savings and loan institutions, mortgage banks, and they also pool loans and sell bonds. These are pretty much the only things you need to know about Ginnie Mae and Freddie Mac. But Fannie Mae is the big one. That's the main one. We had a lot of problems leading up to 2008. That wasn't when it started. It started way before that because there were all kinds of fun things going on in the market. Lenders, if you've ever seen or read The Big Short, the movie The Big Short, the book The Big Short, watch it. At least watch the movie. It does they take some liberties, but you get the idea. The concept is this: banks, lenders felt very confident in the mortgage market, too confident. Lenders would, in fact, loan money to people in very irresponsible ways. So one thing that we saw back in those days was loan to value ratios of 125% LTV. That means you get the keys at closing plus 25% of the loan amount. Congratulations. Put some furniture in your new house. Because what could possibly go wrong? People are always going to make their mortgage payment, right? We learned no. We learned the answer was no. Because if you have your house, you have your fancy car, you have your credit cards, and a certain lifestyle, we learned that a lot of people just drive through a mobile home park and you'll see really nice cars out front of houses that aren't worth as much as the cars. So people tend to keep the cars longer than the houses. We learned the hard way. But the lenders didn't realize this. They thought, surely they'll keep making their house payment. We can give them this because it's going to appreciate over time. Plus, they're always going to pay. There's less risk, low risk of default. And so that was one crazy thing that we had. Another one was stated income loans. What if we do the math and we realized, oh, you need to make $15,000 a month in order to afford this $400,000 house you want. I'm adjusting for 2008 prices. And you say, well, I'm a real estate agent. I make 1099 income. Lenders don't like that. They would rather have W-2 income. And so I get paid in commissions and bonuses, and it's just sales based. It's not a promise from an employer that as long as I stay employed, they'll pay me a W-2. So real estate agents, salespeople especially, struggle with financing. We always minimize our taxable income in the general life, but then when it comes time to get a mortgage, we need to show larger income, and we worked against ourselves. In order just to pay less in taxes legally, we minimize how much, took a lot of deductions as we're allowed to do. But then the lender says, well, gosh, you don't make much on paper. And you have to kind of take a hit for a year so that you can justify paying and affording that larger house that you might want. So stated income loan. Hey, lender, how much would I need to earn in order to afford this house? Oh, you need to earn $15,000 a month, do you? Sure I do. Okay, sign here, promising that that's the truth. And that's about it. That was a stated income loan. Do you promise this is what you make? How much do I need to make? Yeah, okay, sure, I promise that. Problem was, it was sometimes not the full truth. And when the person got in trouble, they defaulted. And this person maybe spent that 25% of the loan amount not on increasing the value of the house, but on Disney trips, on cars, on things that depreciated. And so this caused default. And then remember that thing about how the lender could send a payment stub and they could say, look, you can make your full PITI payment for $1,500. Or if you're having trouble this month, you can do an interest-only payment of $1,100. Which is it? Which one do you want to do any given month? And a lot of people said, oh, wow, I can save $400 a month. I'll just do it this one month until next month. And they say, well, I could use another $400 this month too. And then they sort of get hooked on that lower payment and they end up not making any progress paying down that loan. So instead of this, it's a flat line and they never pay the loan off. Or adjustable rate mortgages. So you could have a fixed rate. And at the time when I got in the business, let me think, fast forward, it was around what we are now, around a 6 or 7% interest rate. Or if you need a lower rate, rather than do a buy down, you could do a temporary buy down and say, well, I need an adjustable rate, which means the first year it'll be 5%. The next year it's going to adjust either up or down, and I'm willing to gamble it'll be maybe down, but quite often it was up. And maybe it went up to 6 that second year, and maybe it went up to 7 the year after that. Well, you got into it barely affording the purchase price at the 5% rate, feeling confident you would have a better financial position by the time it went up, but certainly by the time it went up significantly, you weren't any better off. And so a lot of people who started out with an adjustable rate were too optimistic about their future, and unforeseen things happened, and so they couldn't make that payment on the amount it adjusted up to. What's the adjustment happen based upon? Some sort of an index, a financial index from the boring section of the newspaper, right? Like a 10-year bond might dictate how much that could adjust to. You might get lucky and adjust down, but you got to be prepared for it to adjust up. Adjustable rate mortgages aren't bad. They just need to be with full disclosure and strategically chosen. A lot of times credit unions only offer adjustable rate mortgages. By the way, not a testable thing, just a thing. So it's not just that you shouldn't do it, but people didn't understand them and they frivolously got into them because they were attracted to that lower than the market first rate. Right now, the market rate's in the 7s. What if somebody said, I'll give you a rate at 6%, a 1.5% lower than everyone else? You'd be inclined to at least listen to how they're doing that. And, it's because it's an adjustable rate. Think about how tempting that might be and how much more house you could afford with that lower rate, which is really the thing that gets people. They're walking through the new construction house. They smell all the new things, new paint, new carpet. And I don't know what it is about the new car smell, but new house smell, same thing. We make bad decisions. We're like, nobody's ever used this toilet. That's nice. Among other things, right? They make it very appealing. So all of that stuff combined, falling apart at the same time, realizing that when times got slightly challenging, people would default on these loans, would default on stated income loans, would default on adjustable rates, and it all came crashing down. Then we had significant major mortgage upheaval because the lenders had given such relaxed qualifying guidelines. And then they adapted, right? After all of this subprime failure, subprime loans too, loaning money to people with B credit, C credit, D credit, bad credit scores. The idea again was, they always pay their mortgage payment. They don't want to be homeless. Well, turns out they would live in that fancy car before they'd live in that fancy house because they could still afford the car payment, but the house payment was out of their control. So with all that said, there's the landscape. Let's talk about the three main kinds of loans. The first is a conventional loan. Again, if you can get one because you have good enough score and you have enough for down payment, it's probably going to be the less amount of fees over the life of the loan. So a conventional loan has nothing to do with the government much. A little bit, but not much. It's slightly overseen by the government as a result of 2008, 9, 10. A legislation was passed back then called the Dodd-Frank Act, and that was intended to help fix all these problems that occurred with the lender misbehavior, really. And so that means the government pretty much slightly oversees all loans, including conventional loans. But for the most part, it's not insured or guaranteed by the government. A conventional loan is not backed by the government. It's overseen. They keep a watch, but they don't insure it. They don't guarantee it. Guess what? The other two loan types we're going to get to next, one of them is insured by the government. One of them is guaranteed by the government. Those are all testable items that we'll see in a minute. The conventional loans are almost always sold on the secondary market because they are better risk, lower LTV, also lower loan to value ratio. They're borrowing less and they have higher credit scores, which means less risk to the lender. You could have conventional loans that are conforming loans that meet the guidelines that Fannie Mae helps to create. And those are typically at a max of a certain price point. But once you get to the super expensive houses, now you've got to go to a conventional non-conforming loan, one of which is called a jumbo loan for a more expensive house. We're talking into the millions. Those don't conform because they're out of the norm, but they are still possible. They're still conventional loans that you would get to buy such a thing. They're just non-conforming loans. So that's conventional. Another thing to know is this. the lender's all about risk. And they feel like that out of the full 100% of the value of the property, if you have at least 20% of your own money or down payment, also known as equity in the beginning, that equity starts growing from the down payment you put in it, they feel more comfortable. The lender's like, I feel pretty confident that this borrower putting at least 20% down is going to be super less likely to default. And I don't have to go through the expensive foreclosure process. Well, 20% is what they like to see, but a lot more people buy houses if they can put less than 20% down. So if we zoom in, what about the people that do 5% down or 10 or 15? That's allowed. The lender will certainly take a loan with 5% down payment, but remember, they still want the 20. So this 5% down person, that's how much of their money they're putting down. But the lender requires mortgage insurance to make up this difference. The difference between the 5% down and the 20% they would rather you be putting down, it needs to be covered with a mortgage insurance policy. Mortgage insurance. And when it's a conventional loan, it's called private mortgage insurance, or PMI. The PMI covers the lender's concerns between the 5% in down payment you've put and the 20% they would feel better with you putting. They still let you do the 5%, but they need a policy in place to cover that 15%. And that's called PMI. So another way to say this is, if you get a conventional loan and you put down less than 20%, the lender's going to charge PMI. You're going to have to get a private mortgage insurance policy from a private mortgage insurance provider. So what does that look like? It's additional security for the lender in case the buyer defaults, because the buyer's putting less than the 20% down that makes the lender feel the best. The borrower pays for it. Congratulations. You get to pay for that PMI policy that benefits the lender. It doesn't benefit you at all. It does nothing for you except let you borrow the money to buy the house. Without it, you're not able to get the loan at all. So that helps you. But it's not a policy that benefits you. In case you default, the lender's getting the payout of this policy. That's their requirement for making the loan for you. And then it depends on the loan to value ratio. Again, the lower down payment you're putting, the more PMI of a policy it needs to be in place. And the conventional loan is going to be based on the sales price or the appraised value, whichever's lower. So what if you agree with the seller to pay them the maybe even over asking price? Because every CE class I teach, taught one today, I always ask, how much over asking price are you seeing? Today, I saw the most I've ever seen in several years of CE class. I saw some people saying $600,000 over asking price. I saw some 300s and lots of 100s. I always see those, and 50s over asking price. Maybe they wanted $1 million, but they got $1.6 million, for instance. Depends on the price point. But what happens when the house sells over asking price? What are we immediately nervous about as brokers involved? Is it going to appraise? We did our market analysis, which we'll learn about in the valuation chapter, but somebody was willing to pay more? Is it going to appraise for more? It has to. If they're borrowing money to buy this house, and let's say they had it on the market for $600,000, but they ended up getting it sold for $700,000. So original list price was $600,000. It sold for $700,000. That $600,000 doesn't matter anymore. The contract price is $700,000, but then the appraisal comes in, and based on what similar houses have sold for most recently, maybe they could only justify $650,000. Well, the amount that you're borrowing is going to be based on the 650. If we can't get that appraiser to come up and agree that it's worth more than they originally thought because we appealed it and maybe they said, oh, okay, you're right, I was wrong. Good luck with that. Appeals are pretty tough to get. And it appraises for 650. It doesn't matter that the contract price was 700. Doesn't matter to the lender. The borrower is going to have to, if they have a 90% LTV, it's going to need to be 90% of the 650, not 90% of the 700. So whatever the loan is, it's going to be based on the lower of the two, sale price or appraised value, whichever is lower. Why? Because the lender hires the appraiser. They want that third party opinion of what the house is truly worth, not yours as the broker. They want to know what the appraiser says. And so that's what really counts to the lender. And so that's how much they're going to base that loan to value ratio on. Not the sale price, only if that's the lower of the two. It could appraise for 750. Maybe the appraisal comes in higher than the sale price, and that's fine, but it's going to then appraise for that sale price. It won't appraise for that higher appraised value. I've never seen an appraisal that big of a discrepancy on the high side, but theoretically. So putting less than 20% down requires private mortgage insurance. It's a policy that's temporary, by the way. What happens when what the lender's concerned about is your equity compared to the amount that you have borrowed. So it looks like this. Again, you've got this purchase price, 100% of the value of the property. And then you've got this 20% mark, which is what the lender wishes you had down, but you only have 5% down. And so that lender wants you to have a policy for that difference. So really it's about your equity. You're going to start with the down payment. Day one, first payment, you're at 5% of equity, because you've put 5% of the purchase price as a down payment. But over time, a couple things are going to happen. Natural appreciation that just happens, hopefully, is going to go up. So maybe now, instead of equity in the property of 5%, which let's say maybe you put down 100,000, maybe the whole property value goes up, and so the house is worth more. Over time. What else is it? What else can happen? Capital improvement. Maybe you spend some money making the house worth more. You upgrade the kitchen, the bathroom, you finish out the basement, making it more livable, heated square feet. And then also paying the loan down. Loan decrease over time. So all of these things increase how much you're going to end up with in equity. That equals equity increase. All of these three activities. So you started out with 5% equity in the property, which was just the down payment. But because of these various three things, this goes up over time. Maybe eventually, within 5 or 10 years, your equity in the property hits that 20% mark. And now the lender is more comfortable with you. The lender says, oh, well, now they have 20% equity in the property because the value went up, but so did their equity. And so now we're comfortable and we don't need PMI anymore. It can get canceled. So when the equity is below 20, they need PMI. But when it gets up to 20, you can make a case and say, please remove the PMI. How much is it, by the way? PMI could be an extra $80 to $150 a month on top of the PITI and other things. So when it hits, by the way, when it hits 22%, the PMI has to come off. But it could come off at 20. You would just have to prove it. You might say, I'm tired of this PMI. I think I've got enough appreciation that it's hit the 20. They probably are going to make you pay for an appraisal fee so that you can prove that that equity has gone up. Let's have all your attention, please. So it's temporary. It's removed when the LTV requirement is met. Right? And that's a conventional loan as opposed to FHA. Let's take a look at FHA. FHA loans, now we're talking government backed. How? The FHA loans, this is testable. 100% testable, guys. FHA loans are insured by the government. They're insured by the government. Not guaranteed by the government, but insured. By the way, VA loans are guaranteed by the government. So know the difference. VA are guaranteed by the government. FHA are insured by the government. What does this mean? First of all, FHA loans, FHA, Federal Home Administration, Federal Housing Administration, does not originate or make loans. You're not borrowing the money from them. They're just insuring the loans so lenders feel more comfortable. Lenders are making the loans, originating them. Lenders are determining the rate. Lenders are approving the borrower. And when it's an FHA loan that has less than 20% equity, that mortgage insurance premium is charged, which is like mortgage insurance, right? It's just their version. When it's an FHA loan, they call it MIP, mortgage insurance. When it's a conventional loan, it's called PMI, private mortgage insurance. So mortgage insurance premium versus private mortgage insurance. One second, guys. All right. So FHA. That's how you're going to know they're talking about an FHA loan, by the way. If they mention MIP or mortgage insurance premium, you'll think, oh, this is not conventional. This is FHA, but it accomplishes the same goal. It's because less than 20% has been put down. The borrower's starting with less than 20% equity, but it's insured by the government. The upside of an FHA loan is it allows for a lower down payment, down to 3.5% instead of the 5 or more for conventional. It allows for a lower credit score, and it allows that higher debt to income ratio. Remember, the DTI, debt to income ratio for FHA, is between 31 and 43. One second, guys. All right. So the upsides: lower credit score, lower down payment possible, no prepayment penalty allowed. Remember that part? We saw prepayment penalties don't apply or not allowed to be part of FHA or VA loans. And also the higher debt to income ratio, 31-43 instead of 28-36. And then the negative, the downside for the borrower for an FHA loan, that MIP mortgage insurance never goes away. It stays the whole time, even though you've gotten to the 20% equity point. So why would you get an FHA loan? Because you need the lower down payment or you need the lower credit score ability. But if you could make the choice, that's another way that conventional is better, because you could eventually get rid of the PMI from your payment, but not with FHA. Good thing as a broker to make sure people are aware of that they're not going to get out of that PMI or MIP. Sorry. VA loans are guaranteed by the Veteran Affairs Department of the government. Again, VA, just like FHA, they do not originate loans. The lender's making the loan, lender's setting the rate, and the lender's approving the borrower. The VA is just guaranteeing the loan. VA might actually make a loan. Here's an exception. If it's an extremely rural area where other lenders aren't willing to make the loan, if no lenders are available. The upside, down payment as little as 0%. You could start out at zero equity because 0% down payment. You can prepay without the penalty, just like we already knew. Sorry. Okay. And loans are assumable, just like they are with FHA. The downside is there's a funding fee paid at closing. No down payment, but there is a funding fee. And there's also an origination fee paid at closing. And you have a certain amount of entitlement allowed to you for the VA loan. And you can, as a military veteran, allow someone else to assume your VA loan. Maybe you want to do that when you sell the property. You can appeal to more buyers because you can say, look, I can let you assume my nice low rate. Back when I got the loan, the rates were at 3. You want to assume a lower rate? They would have to be approved. It'd have to be a qualifying assumable. But here's another interesting point. For a VA loan, it can be a non-military veteran who assumes it. So there could be a non-veteran that has a VA loan because they assumed one from a veteran. To get it originated from the very beginning, you do have to be a veteran, but you can let someone, a non-veteran, assume it. And so one VA loan at a time is not the best way to say this. You have a certain amount of entitlement available to you to borrow. And if you've let a lot of that be assumed by someone else, then you can't use that amount that you're entitled to until that person refinances out of the VA loan and now frees it back up for you. But you could get, how many VA loans could someone get in their lifetime? As many as they want over time, but they can only get one at a time. One at a time. There's something called a certificate of reasonable value, which is basically like an appraisal. And you have to use a VA approved appraiser who knows how to appraise for VA loans. You also, if it's an FHA loan, you have to use an FHA approved appraiser for those. And then that entitlement you're entitled to, the entitlement amount that you can borrow, is determined by your length of service and what kind of discharge when you left the military. And then you get a certificate of eligibility when you first start this VA process. You need to get from the Department of VA your certificate of eligibility showing that you can get that VA loan. And that's the maximum guarantee. It's like a pre-approval, sort of. So those are all VA loan terms that you might run across: CRV, certificate of reasonable value, entitlement, and eligibility. When you're working with a VA borrower, you'll ask them questions like, do you have your certificate of eligibility yet? They need to go to the VA and get that. Usually that's something that they'll talk about with the lender, but it's nice to know this stuff. You can also get some designations behind your name, right? As a real estate broker. You'll see the letters behind some agents' names, like CCIM is a big commercial designation, means you took a lot of courses. In fact, the CCIM is the most expensive one I know of. It costs like $12,000 by the time you've taken all those courses. It's serious, right? Anybody with a CCIM is serious about the business. But then the real estate on the residential side, those designations you've seen, maybe see letters like CRS, GRI. There's one called MRP, Military Relocation Professional, that I picked up a couple years ago, and that goes more into the deep dive of VA loans and working with military folks. There's also USDA loans, another government loan guaranteed by the government through the USDA. They're a direct loan from the USDA. It's for low to moderate income households. So there's a cap on income. You can't make more than X dollars a month, a year to get a USDA loan. Is to help people that otherwise wouldn't be able to have a home. And it's another 0% down home loan option. It only applies to the more rural areas. So you're not going to get a USDA loan right in the heart of downtown anywhere. It's going to be out in the suburbs, out beyond the suburbs, probably more in the country, in the sticks. And so the interest rates are lowered, subsidized by the USDA. The borrower can pay a lower rate because the USDA covers some of the rate. The problem with USDA loans is they set aside a certain amount for them, for everybody, every year. And so if you go too far into the year, it might run out of money. The funding can run out, inconsistent funding. And so depending on when you're helping that person who might seek the USDA loan, there may not be any more money. They might need to wait. If that's the only way they can buy a house, they need to wait till the budget is restocked for the next year. There are other kinds of loans we'll talk more about as we finish up tomorrow night. We're going to go from this into the closing procedures, closing contracts and closings. We've done the contracts. We're going to talk about closing stuff, which will be more math, by the way. So read ahead, plan ahead, do some exercises, and get familiar with that. And I'll see you tomorrow evening. Have a great night.